Hook Adrian Vale kissed her in his own office. Slow, deliberate. His hand cupped the younger woman's face, the way he hadn't touched his wife in months. With intention, with hunger, with the kind of tenderness that told Elena everything she needed to know about how little she had meant to him lately. Elena stood frozen in the corridor outside the glass partition, 34 weeks pregnant, one hand pressed flat against the wall to keep herself upright. She watched her husband pull Sienna Cross closer. She watched Sienna smile against his mouth. She watched the man who had promised to stand beside her, through everything choose someone else quietly, privately, as though Elena had already ceased to exist. She didn't knock. She didn't scream. She turned around and walked back to the elevator. Her hands didn't shake until the doors closed. If you've ever watched someone you loved choose another life right in front of you, if you've ever had to decide between collapsing and surviving, then you already know what Elena felt standing in that corridor. Stay with this story until the end. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss what happens next. Hit that like button and drop your city or country in the comments right now. I want to see how far this story travels, because what Elena discovers in the hours that follow will change everything you think you know about betrayal, power, and the secrets that the people closest to us have been keeping all along. Elena didn't go home, not immediately. She sat in her car in the parking structure beneath Vale Shipping's corporate tower for 43 minutes. The engine was off. The overhead fluorescents hummed. She kept her hands in her lap and stared at the concrete pillar directly in front of her windshield and breathed the way the midwife had taught her: slow in, slow out, counting to 4. The baby moved, a hard rolling shift against her ribs, and Elena pressed her palm flat against the swell of her stomach and held it there. I know, she said to no one. She'd known something was wrong for weeks. Not suspected, known. The kind of knowing that lives in your chest before your brain catches up. Adrian had been arriving home later than usual since March, and it was now the second week of May. He'd stopped asking her opinion on the quarterly shipping projections, even though she'd spent 3 years building the analysis framework he still used. He'd hired a new executive liaison, Sienna Cross, 29, sharp, thin, the particular brand of confidence that comes from never having been told no. And when Elena had mentioned carefully that Sienna seemed to be attending meetings above her clearance level, Adrian had laughed. You're on leave, he'd said, let it go. She hadn't been on leave. She'd been working from home because her blood pressure had spiked in February, and her doctor had told her that the combination of stress and her 3rd trimester was not a negotiation. She'd kept working. She'd just stopped going to the office. So she hadn't seen it with her own eyes until today, when she'd come in to sign paperwork for the new insurance clause on the Pacific freight routes and taken the wrong corridor out of habit, the old one that ran past the executive suite windows instead of around them. She'd seen everything in under 10 seconds. She started the car. The drive home took 22 minutes, and Elena spent most of it cycling through the stages of something she didn't have a name for yet. Something past hurt and short of fury. Something hollow and hot at the same time. She'd loved Adrian Vale for 6 years. She'd married him in year 2. She'd built his company's strategic framework when the legacy analysts were still running projections on decade-old models. She'd been the one, 4 years ago, who'd identified the regulatory gap that saved Vale Shipping $47 million in a single fiscal quarter. She'd done it from a hospital bed after an appendix surgery, running numbers on a borrowed laptop, because Adrian had called her and said he needed her, and she'd believed completely that the feeling was mutual. She pulled into their driveway. The housekeeper had already gone home. The house was quiet. Elena walked through the kitchen, set her bag on the counter, stood at the sink for a moment looking out at the garden, and then she went to Adrian's home office, because that was where he kept physical copies of anything sensitive enough that he didn't fully trust the cloud backup. She wasn't sure what she was looking for. She found more than she expected. The document on top of the stack was a restructuring proposal. 40 pages, tabbed and annotated in Sienna's handwriting. Elena recognized the narrow, slanted print from the memos that had started appearing in the company-wide distribution in April. The proposal outlined a new corporate structure for Vale Shipping that involved a performance contingency clause. If the company missed specified freight targets in a rolling 18-month window, operational governance would temporarily transfer to an outside management group while the internal executive team underwent review. The outside management group had a name: Meridian Capital Partners. Elena stood at Adrian's desk and read the proposal twice. The first time fast, looking for the shape of it. The second time slowly, line by line, the way her father had taught her to read anything that involved money and other people's intentions. By the time she reached page 31, her hands were steady. Meridian Capital Partners was not a general investment group. It was structured as a pass-through, a single managing entity above 3 subsidiary investment vehicles, all registered in different states. The language in the proposal described them as an independent oversight body with extensive experience in maritime logistics restructuring. Elena took a photograph of page 31 with her phone. Then she went to the kitchen, made herself a cup of decaf, sat at the table, and started cross-referencing names on her laptop. It took her 90 minutes to find what she suspected was there. 2 of the 3 subsidiary vehicles under Meridian Capital Partners shared board members with a holding company registered in Delaware in 2019. The holding company's primary listed asset was a 23% stake in Continental Harbor Group, which was the shipping enterprise run by Gideon Vale, Adrian's uncle, who had spent the better part of a decade publicly claiming he had no interest in Vale Shipping's operations and privately making moves that suggested the opposite. Elena sat back. She thought about Adrian's face that morning at breakfast, the easy way he'd spoken about Sienna's quarterly recommendations, the offhand comment he'd made about the board being ready for bold action. She'd asked him what kind of bold action, and he'd said structural, nothing dramatic, in the tone he used when he'd already decided something and didn't want her input. She closed the laptop. She didn't call him. She didn't prepare a document. She didn't do any of the things she would have done 6 months ago, when she'd still believed that Adrian Vale was the kind of man who listened when his wife told him something was wrong. Instead, she went upstairs, brushed her teeth, put on her oldest t-shirt, and got into bed. She was asleep by 9:30. Adrian came home at 11. She heard him on the end of the stairs, heard him pause outside their bedroom door. A long pause, longer than usual, and then the door opened quietly and he moved through the dark to his side of the bed, without turning on a light. He was careful, considerate. He always was when he came home late, and Elena had used to think that carefulness meant something. She kept her breathing even. He lay down, turned on his side away from her. Within 12 minutes, his breathing slowed into sleep. Elena lay on her back and stared at the ceiling. She was not thinking about the kiss. She'd filed that away behind a door she couldn't afford to open right now. She was thinking about the restructuring proposal and the 18-month performance window, and what it would mean if Vale Shipping missed its freight targets in a market that had been contracting at 4% annually for the past 2 years. She was thinking about the employees, 2,416 of them across 11 port facilities, who had no idea that the man they worked for was about to sign something that could hand operational control of their livelihoods to an entity controlled by the one person in the world who had publicly wished Adrian failure. She was thinking that she should warn him. She was also thinking about standing in that corridor, watching him kiss Sienna Cross with the particular tenderness he'd stopped offering his pregnant wife somewhere around December. She closed her eyes. She would think about it in the morning. She didn't warn him in the morning. She made breakfast eggs, wheat toast, the grapefruit he always ate in halves, and Adrian came downstairs in his suit, with his hair still damp from the shower, and sat at the table and thanked her and talked about a logistics negotiation in Singapore that needed his attention by end of week. He did not mention Sienna. He did not mention the restructuring proposal. He asked how she was feeling, and she said fine, and he nodded and looked at his phone. She watched him eat. He was 41 years old and still broad across the shoulders, still moved through a room like a man accustomed to it parting for him. She had loved that once, the certainty of him, the density of his presence. Now she looked at his hands cutting the grapefruit and thought, "You are about to make the worst decision of your professional life. And you won't tell me because you stopped believing I'm worth telling." "The restructuring proposal," she said. He glanced up. "I saw it on your desk." A pause. "You were in my office?" "I was looking for the Pacific Freight insurance file. I signed it yesterday and left it on your desk. I was getting it back." He nodded slowly, the nod of a man deciding what shape to give his response. "That's still in development. Sienna's team has done strong work on the framework. The performance contingency clause concerns me. The contingency clause is standard risk allocation. It's not unusual in restructuring agreements at this scale. Meridian Capital Partners isn't a standard oversight body." She kept her voice level, no accusation in it. She'd learned a long time ago that accusation gave Adrian something to argue against. Calm gave him nothing to push. 2 of their subsidiary vehicles share board members with Continental Harbor Group. He set down his fork. That's an indirect connection at best, he said. It's a connection, Elena. He said her name the way he said it when he was tired of the conversation. I have had 4 attorneys and 2 independent analysts review this proposal. Did any of them trace the subsidiary network past the Delaware registration? You did this last night. Yes. He picked his fork back up. I appreciate that you're concerned. I will have the legal team re-examine the subsidiary structure before anything is signed. He said it the way a parent tells a child they'll think about it. Elena looked at him for a moment. Then she picked up her juice and said, "Okay," and didn't say anything else. He left at 7:45. She stood at the kitchen window and watched his car back down the drive. Then she sat at the kitchen table and opened her laptop and started building a file. She spent the next 9 days building the file. She requested her full access codes for the Veil shipping analytics platforms. She still had them because no one had formally revoked them during her medical leave, and Elena had never been the kind of person to mention a tool she wasn't finished using. She pulled 14 months of freight data, cross-referenced it against the performance targets specified in the restructuring proposal's contingency clause, and ran 4 different projection scenarios. In 3 of the 4, Veil shipping missed the targets within the first 9 months of the 18-month window. The 4th scenario required a 14% increase in Pacific route volume in a market that had shown 2.5% annual growth for the past 3 years. She documented everything, named her files carefully, backed them up in 3 places. She also tracked Sienna Cross. Not obsessively, Elena didn't have the emotional energy for obsession at 35 weeks pregnant, but methodically. She pulled every public professional record, every board filing, every registered corporate affiliation. Sienna had worked for 2 firms before Veil shipping. The first was a boutique maritime consultancy in Boston. The second, for 14 months, was a strategic advisory group called Palliser & Group. Elena spent a long afternoon looking at Palliser & Group's client history. Their most significant engagement, listed publicly in a 2021 filing, had been with Continental Harbor Group, Gideon Veil's company. Elena sat very still in her chair for a moment. Then she added that document to her file. She did not send the file to Adrian. She did not forward it to the board. She opened a new subfolder, labeled it with the date, and saved everything in it. She wasn't ready yet. The baby photograph was not something she found. It found her in the way that things you've been carrying a long time tend to surface when you're finally still enough to notice them. She was in the guest room at the far end of the hall, the room that had been converted into a combination study and storage space where 3 generations of Veil family papers had been consolidated into archive boxes after Adrian's father died 4 years ago. Elena had spent several evenings in that room during her medical leave, initially because she'd been looking for a specific freight patent that had been filed under a subsidiary name in the 90s, and later because she found the work calming, organizing, something she could control. The box was labeled Miscellaneous R, Personal RV for Robert Veil, Adrian's father. She'd opened it before. It contained what the label suggested: old correspondence, a few photographs, some personal legal papers that had already been reviewed and filed. She'd been through it twice. But on the 3rd pass, a Tuesday afternoon in the 2nd week of May, 3 weeks after she'd stood in that corridor, watching her husband choose someone else, she found the photograph because she found the envelope first. It had slipped between 2 larger documents, the kind of thing you miss the first 2 times and only find when you slow down. A plain manila envelope, sealed, with her name written on the front. Not Elena Veil, not Elena Marlowe Veil, Elena Marlowe, her maiden name. In handwriting, she recognized Robert Veil's careful, old-fashioned script. She sat down on the floor, her back against the wall, legs stretched out, the envelope in both hands. She looked at it for a long time. Then she opened it. Inside was a photograph, black and white, slightly faded. An infant, no more than a few weeks old, lying on a white blanket, round-faced, eyes closed. The kind of photograph that existed before digital cameras, developed from film and kept carefully, deliberately. Elena turned it over. On the back, in the same handwriting, she saved our family. And below that, 4 digits. A number she recognized as a legal filing reference format, the kind used by Veil Shipping's original corporate attorney, a man named Harlan Cross, who had retired in 2014. She looked at the infant in the photograph for a long time. Then she carefully put the photograph back in the envelope, put the envelope in her bag, and closed the archive box. She called her mother that evening. Her mother, Margaret Marlowe, was 71 years old and lived in a two-bedroom house in Gloucester, Massachusetts, 40 minutes north of Boston. She answered on the third ring, the way she always did, as though she'd been doing something else right up, until the moment she decided to pick up. "I found a photograph," Elena said, "in Robert Vale's personal papers." Silence. "Mom, what kind of photograph? A baby?" "I think it's me." It says. Elena steadied herself. "It says she saved our family." In Robert's handwriting. Another silence. Longer this time. "I was going to tell you," her mother said, when it was time. "Tell me what, Elena?" Her mother's voice was careful, measuring. The voice she used when she was deciding how far the truth needed to go. "There are some things about why we moved to Boston when you were very small. About what I did before that. I worked for Harlan Cross, Robert Vale's attorney. I was his paralegal for 4 years, and near the end of that time, I found something that someone inside the company was trying to hide. Something that would have taken the company apart." Elena sat down at the kitchen table. "What did you find?" "A set of financial transfers. Internal. Someone was draining the company's operating accounts into private vehicles, about $8 million over 18 months, routed through 3 different legal entities. I found the pattern by accident, working on a routine audit. I brought it to Harlan. Harlan brought it to Robert. What happened? The person involved was let go. The transfers were reversed where they could be. Robert was a pause. He was grateful in a way that was difficult to receive for a paralegal. He was a private man. He didn't know how to say what he wanted to say. "Mom, what does the photograph mean? What does she saved our family mean?" Her mother took a breath. "Robert was afraid," she said, "that the people behind the internal betrayal had enough reach to try again. That if he didn't create some kind of structural protection that lived outside the family, some safeguard that couldn't be reached by anyone who might one day control the company from inside, it would be vulnerable again." Elena felt something cold settle in her chest. "He created a dormant protective clause," her mother said, "a legal instrument tied to the original corporate charter. He placed it in your name, not mine. He felt it needed to be generational, something that would exist long enough to matter. Something that couldn't be accessed until you were an adult, and the company was genuinely in danger. He put it in my name. You were 8 weeks old. I didn't know what to do. I wasn't sure I believed he would actually follow through. And then we moved, and years passed," and her voice caught. "Elena, I know how this sounds." Elena looked at the envelope on the table in front of her. "What does the clause actually do?" she said. "Harlan Cross filed it under a subsidiary protection mechanism. If Vale Shipping faces an external takeover or unauthorized transfer of operational control, the holder of the clause can freeze all pending external transfers and trigger an independent audit. The 18-month performance window. Meridian Capital Partners. 2 subsidiary vehicles with board members connected to Gideon Vale. I need Harlan Cross's contact information," Elena said. "He's retired, but I have his number. He would take your call. Give it to me." She called Harlan Cross the next morning. He was 83, sharp-voiced, and not remotely surprised to hear from her. He'd been expecting the call, he said, for a long time. He'd wondered after Robert's death whether Elena had found the envelope in the archive boxes. "I had hoped Robert might have prepared you more directly," he said. "But he was a man who believed in letting things reveal themselves when they were needed." "I need to understand what I'm holding," Elena said. "You're holding a protective trust instrument filed under Vale Shipping's original corporate charter in 1993, Harlan said. "It was structured specifically to survive changes in executive leadership. It gives the named holder the authority to freeze any pending external transfer of operational governance and trigger an independent third-party audit of the triggering event. Can it be challenged?" "It can be challenged. It would take time. More time than an 18-month contingency window would allow." Elena pressed the phone against her ear and looked at the wall. "Does Adrian know this exists?" she asked. A pause. Robert chose not to tell him. He felt Harlan started again. He felt that if Adrian knew, he would try to control it, remove it, and then there would be no protection at all. Elena thought about Adrian's face at the breakfast table. The way he'd said it's not unusual in restructuring agreements at this scale, and then gone back to his grapefruit. "I need copies of everything," she said. "I'll have my former associate overnight them to you this afternoon." "Thank you, Mrs. Vale," Harlan said before she could hang up. She waited. "Your mother was a good woman who did a hard thing for people who didn't deserve the size of her sacrifice. Whatever you decide to do with what you're holding, I think you should know that." Elena said thank you again and hung up. She sat at the kitchen table for a long time, The morning light moving slowly across the floor, the envelope in front of her hand flat on the surface beside it. She thought about Sienna Cross, about the Palliser and Group connection to Continental Harbor Group, about the 14% growth scenario that existed only on paper. She thought about what her mother had done alone, as a young woman with an infant, finding something dangerous inside someone else's world and bringing it forward, even though it cost her the stability of the life she'd built. She thought about the afternoon in the corridor, the glass partition, Adrian's hand on another woman's face. She did not decide anything yet, but she understood now what she was holding. And she understood now that Robert Vale had not given her this instrument because he owed her anything. He had given it to her because he'd seen, in an 8-week-old infant, the child of a woman who had already proved what she would do when it mattered. Elena picked up the envelope. She carried it upstairs to the room that was going to be Noah's room. The crib already assembled against the wall, the small dresser painted white, the mobile with the wooden bird suspended above the mattress. She put the envelope in the top drawer of the dresser, beneath a folded blanket. Then she went back downstairs and opened her laptop. She had work to do. The documents from Harlan Cross arrived the next afternoon. 47 pages, the legal language dense and careful, every clause cross-referenced to the original 1993 charter filing. Elena read them twice, made margin notes in pencil, photographed each page. Then she called a corporate attorney she trusted, not anyone connected to Vale Shipping, a woman named Patricia Osee who specialized in corporate governance and had once 3 years ago consulted informally on a subsidiary dispute that Elena had quietly resolved without Adrian knowing how close it had come to litigation. Patricia listened to everything without interrupting. And she said, "Send me the documents." Elena sent them. "I want you to tell me 3 things," Elena said. "Whether the instrument is enforceable, how long activation would take, and what the immediate effect on any pending external transfer would be." Patricia called back 4 hours later. "It's enforceable," she said. "The drafting is unusual, but it's solid." Harlan Cross was better than his reputation. "If you activate it, the immediate effect is a mandatory freeze on all pending external transfers of operational governance. Anything in process stops for a minimum of 90 days, pending independent audit. No one can override it in that window without a court order, and the judicial record would become public." Would Gideon Vale's people know what hit them? Not immediately. And by the time they figured it out, the 90-day clock would already be running. Elena made a note. "Don't activate it yet," Patricia said. "I know. If you activate it before the agreement is signed, you expose what you're holding. Wait until the agreement exists and the transfer is pending. That's when the freeze does maximum damage to their timeline." "I know," Asena said again. "And Elena," Patricia's voice shifted slightly. "What's your goal here? Protecting the company or hurting him?" Elena looked at the window for a moment. At the afternoon light on the garden. "The employees," she said. 2,400 of them. A pause. "Okay," Patricia said, "then wait." Elena waited. She went to her prenatal appointments. She assembled the last of Noah's furniture. She ate regular meals and took her blood pressure medication and slept 7 hours a night, which was 4 hours less than she needed, but more than she'd managed in weeks. She kept adding to her file, tracked every movement in Sienna's public professional footprint, watched the board meeting calendar, noted when Adrian came home late and when he didn't, and she did not warn him again. Not because she didn't want to. She turned that impulse over many times, examined it honestly. She could have sent Patricia's analysis to his attorneys. She could have put the Meridian-Gideon connection in a document and slid it under his office door. She chose not to, and she knew exactly why. It wasn't revenge. She didn't want Adrian humiliated or destroyed. She wanted him to understand, in a way that would reach him past his arrogance, past the absolute certainty he carried, that his own judgment was sufficient, that there were consequences to treating the person who'd protected you as though she no longer existed. She couldn't give him that understanding by saving him again. He needed to feel the fall, even if only for a moment, even if the fall was something she could catch. She held the dormant claws in her hands, and the company her mother had once protected, and the knowledge that Robert Vale had trusted her with something he hadn't trusted his own son with, and she waited. Outside the window, the garden was green. The light was long and warm. The baby moved under her ribs, and she pressed her hand there, steady, certain, already knowing what came next. She kept the photograph in the top drawer of Noah's dresser. She wasn't ready to put it anywhere else yet, but she hadn't given it back. The documents from Harlan Cross sat in Elena's bag for 3 days before Adrian noticed the change in her. He noticed it the way he noticed most things about his wife lately, peripherally, without full attention, the way you register a change in weather without looking directly at the sky. She was quieter than usual. Not the quiet of a woman who had nothing to say, but the quiet of a woman who had decided not to say it. There was a difference, and Adrian Vale, who had spent 15 years reading rooms full of men who wanted to take things from him, should have known it immediately. He didn't. He was too busy with Singapore. The logistics negotiation had stalled over a Port Authority fee restructuring, and his operations director had called twice in one day, which was twice more than the man usually called in a week. Adrian had spent Tuesday and Wednesday on back-to-back calls, working from the home office in the evenings, eating dinner at his desk, while Elena ate alone at the kitchen table, with a book propped against the fruit bowl. He told himself he would make it up to her. He told himself that a lot. On Thursday morning, she asked him when he planned to sign the restructuring agreement. He was pulling his jacket on by the front door, keys already in hand. The board's reviewing it now, he said. End of next week, probably. Has legal finished the subsidiary analysis? He paused. A small pause. They're working on it. They've had 9 days. Elena. He said her name with the particular compression that meant he was already mentally at the office. I told you I'd have them look at it. You told me that 9 days ago. He looked at her. She was standing at the edge of the kitchen doorway in a gray sweater, her hands folded in front of her, her expression entirely neutral. She looked like she was waiting for a train. I'll follow up today, he said. He followed up that afternoon. His general counsel, a man named Brett Lassiter, who had been with the company 11 years and had the particular quality of always being present and never being quite visible, confirmed that the subsidiary review had been completed. Meridian Capital Partners was, in Lassiter's assessment, a well-structured independent oversight vehicle with a strong track record in maritime sector restructuring. And the subsidiary connections? Adrian asked. Indirect, Lassiter said. Multiple degrees removed from any Vale competitor. Within normal parameters. Adrian leaned back in his chair. Elena flagged a connection to Continental Harbor Group. A pause that lasted 1 second longer than it should have. There's a board overlap at the third-tier subsidiary level, Lassiter said. It's not operationally significant, she said. Meridian's people have a history with Gideon's company. At significant remove. I wouldn't characterize it as a meaningful relationship. Adrian looked at the ceiling for a moment. Make sure that's documented. Of course. He hung up and called Sienna. She answered before the second ring the way she always did, as though she'd been waiting specifically for him, which he knew was probably a cultivated quality, but appreciated anyway, because Elena had stopped doing it sometime around November. Legal cleared the subsidiary question, he said. I expected they would, Sienna said. It's a non-issue. Elena's still concerned. A beat. Adrian. Her voice was gentle, measured, the particular tone of a woman choosing her words around a subject she'd navigated before. Elena is 36 weeks pregnant and under significant stress. Her judgment right now is, don't, he said, silence. Don't qualify her concerns by citing her pregnancy, he said. I don't do that, and neither should you. Another beat. You're right. I'm sorry. He rubbed the back of his neck. The analysis she did, she found the board overlap independently, without the legal team's resources, in one evening. That's not stress talking. What is it then? It's Elena, he said. It's what she does. Sienna said nothing for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice had shifted slightly. A degree or two. Not enough that he could name it precisely. Do you want to delay the signing? He thought about the board's timeline. The Singapore stall. The freight numbers from the first quarter that were already sitting 2 points below projection. He thought about his Uncle Gideon making his quiet moves and never getting his hands dirty and waiting, always waiting, for Adrian to flinch. No, he said. We proceed. He went home that evening and found Elena in Noah's room, sitting in the rocking chair they'd ordered from Vermont, folding small clothes into the dresser drawers with the systematic attention she brought to everything. The room smelled like new wood and the lavender sachets she'd hung on the closet rod. He stood in the doorway. Legal says the Meridian connection is third tier and non-operational, he said. She folded a onesie. What specifically did they say about the Palliser and Group history? He was quiet for a moment. What Palliser history? She looked at him, not sharply. That was the thing about Elena when she was genuinely unsettled. She went very still and very level, all the energy turned inward. Sienna Cross worked for Palliser and Group for 14 months before she joined Vale Shipping. Palliser's most significant client engagement during that period was Continental Harbor Group. That's not third tier. That's direct. He stared at her. Did legal find that? She asked. He didn't answer. Adrian. I'll bring it back to Lassiter. You should bring it to outside counsel. She turned back to the drawer. Someone who doesn't report to you. He wanted to say something else. He wanted to say that he appreciated what she was doing, even if the way she was doing it felt like an accusation. But she'd gone back to folding, quiet and precise, and he knew from 12 years of knowing this woman that she'd already moved on to the next thing in her mind, the thing she wasn't saying, and he didn't know how to reach past that wall anymore. He said goodnight. She said goodnight back. He didn't sleep well. He brought the Palliser question to Lassiter the next morning. Lassiter confirmed it within 2 hours. Yes, Sienna had worked for Palliser. Yes, Palliser had engaged Continental Harbor Group. It was in her professional history, listed correctly, and had been part of her initial hiring review. Why wasn't it flagged? Adrian said. It was reviewed and deemed non-material at the time of hiring, Lassiter said. The engagement ended 14 months before she joined us. The maritime sector is a smaller world than people assume. Professional overlaps are common. Adrian looked at him for a long moment. Pull her full professional background file, he said. Everything. I want to see it today. He had it by 3. He read it at his desk with the door closed, and his calls forwarded to his assistant. It was 22 pages. It was thorough. It confirmed everything Lassiter had said and nothing Elena had implied. And yet, there was something he kept coming back to. A small thing, the kind of detail that wouldn't survive a legal challenge, and probably meant nothing and sat in the back of his throat like a bone. Sienna had submitted her resignation from Palliser and Group on a Thursday. She had begun formal conversations with Vale Shipping's HR department the following Monday. 4 days. People left jobs and started looking for new ones all the time. He knew that. He'd hired people who'd done exactly that. But Sienna hadn't been looking. He'd recruited her, or rather the executive search firm he'd retained had identified her and brought her to his attention. He'd always assumed the timing was the search firm's. He looked at the date of first contact from the executive search firm. It was the Tuesday before Sienna left Palliser. He sat with that for a long time. Then he closed the file and told himself it wasn't enough, that he was letting Elena's suspicions colonize his judgment, that this was exactly what happened when personal and professional got tangled in the same household, which was why he'd spent years trying to keep them separate and had never quite managed it. He called Sienna at 4:30. Come to the office, he said. I need to talk to you about the timeline. She arrived in 12 minutes. She was already in the building and sat across from him with her legs crossed and her expression open and attentive. She wore a charcoal blazer and had a small leather folio on her knee and looked, as she usually did, exactly like what she claimed to be, a serious professional person who was very good at her job. The executive search firm contacted you before you left Palliser, he said. A brief pause. Not long enough to be guilt. Long enough to be calculation. Yes, she said. He waited. I wasn't actively looking, she said. But when the call came, I listened. The opportunity was significant. I thought it was worth exploring before I formally resigned. The timing bothered me, he said. I understand why it might. She met his eyes. But Adrian, people in this industry receive calls constantly. I handled it professionally. I disclosed it to HR during the interview process, and I transitioned responsibly. I don't know what else I could have done. He looked at her. He thought about the way she'd said Elena is 36 weeks pregnant and under significant stress before he'd cut her off. The particular smoothness of the pivot, the way she'd apologized immediately, cleanly, not in a way that felt like genuine contrition, but in the way of someone well-practiced in recognizing when they'd overstepped. What was the nature of your work with Palliser when they were engaged with Continental Harbor? He asked. I worked on the maritime logistics component of a sector analysis. It was research-level work. I had no direct client contact with Continental Harbor. None? I attended one preliminary briefing. That was the extent of it. He nodded slowly. You should sign the agreement, Sienna said. Her voice was even, unhurried. The board is ready. The timeline is sound. Every day you delay costs us positioning in the Pacific restructuring. And your uncle is not sitting still while you reconsider. He knew that last part was true. He'd received 3 calls from board members in the past week, routine check-ins, that were not actually routine, that were the kind of calls board members made when they were getting restless, and someone was feeding that restlessness from outside. End of next week, he said. She nodded, stewed, picked up the folio. At the door she stopped, turned back. I know you trust Elena's instincts, she said. I respect that. But she hasn't been in these rooms for 6 months. The landscape has changed. Some of her concerns are real. The Meridian connection is worth watching. But freezing because of it hands Gideon the window he's been waiting for. He didn't say anything. She left. He sat at his desk for a long time after, watching the light change over the city through the floor-to-ceiling windows. He thought about the landscape she'd mentioned. The board calls. Gideon's silence, which was never actually silence, just a different frequency than talking. He thought about Elena in Noah's room, folding small clothes with her careful hands, asking him what specific thing legal had found about the Palliser history. He should have asked Lassiter that specific question. He hadn't. He picked up the phone and called his general counsel back. The Palliser engagement with Continental Harbor, he said. What exactly was Sienna's role? A pause. Research support, Lassiter said. She attended a preliminary briefing. That's what she told me. I want to know what you found independently. Another pause. Longer. That's consistent with what we found. You spoke with Palliser? We reviewed the documentation provided in her professional file. You didn't call Palliser directly. Silence, Brett, Adrian said. The documentation was complete, Lassiter said. There was no indication that independent verification was necessary. Adrian hung up without saying goodbye, which he almost never did. He sat there. He thought about 14 months at Palliser. One preliminary briefing. Documentation provided in her professional file by her, or by Palliser on request, or by someone else entirely. He thought about Elena's voice on the phone in his memory. Someone who doesn't report to you. He sat at his desk for 20 minutes. Then he picked up the phone again and called Marcus Dell, a former federal prosecutor who now ran a boutique corporate investigations firm and had done 3 pieces of work for Vail Shipping in the past 5 years. Sensitive work, the kind that didn't leave trails. I need a background run, he said. Quick and quiet. How quick? 5 days. It'll cost. I know. He gave Marcus the parameters. Sienna Cross. Employment history, specifically Palliser and Group, specifically the Continental Harbor engagement. Any communication records that might surface through the usual channels. Any financial disclosures. Any corporate affiliations not listed in her public professional history. And the search firm, he added. The one that first contacted her. I want to know who retained them. Marcus said he'd be in touch. Adrian went home. Elena was in bed when he got there. Not asleep. The light was still on, but she had her book open and didn't look up when he came in. He changed in the bathroom, brushed his teeth, and got into bed, and lay in the dark on his side of the mattress with the ceiling above him and her lamp warm and steady at the periphery. I called an investigator, he said. She turned a page to look at Sienna's background, specifically the Palliser history. She stopped. I should have done it a week ago, he said. She set the book down on her chest. She was looking at the ceiling, not at him. Okay, she said. Just that. He turned his head. Her profile was still. The straight nose, the line of her jaw, the way she held herself even lying down with a kind of precise self-containment. She was 33 years old and 8 months pregnant, and she had found a corporate conspiracy in one evening from their kitchen table, and she was lying next to him saying okay in a voice that meant something else entirely. Elena, she waited. I heard you, he said. I should have heard you sooner. She turned her head and looked at him. Her eyes in the lamplight were dark and entirely clear, and he had the sudden vertiginous sense that she was seeing him very accurately and from a considerable distance. Yes, she said. You should have. She picked up her book again. He lay there. He did not sleep until almost 2. Marcus Dell called on the 4th day. Adrian took the call in his car, parked in the structure beneath the office, engine running. The Palliser Continental Harbor engagement, Marcus said. Cross wasn't research support. She was the primary analyst on the maritime logistics component. 18 months of work. She was in Continental Harbor's executive offices at least 9 times. I have building access records. Adrian's hand tightened on the phone. The search firm, Marcus continued, that originally reached out to her, they were retained 4 months before they contacted her. The retaining client is listed as a strategic advisory holding company. It took me a day to get past the shell structure. A pause. The holding company has a registered agent in common with one of Meridian Capital Partners' subsidiary vehicles. The parking structure was very quiet. Adrian could hear the ventilation system. Someone arranged for her to be placed at Vail Shipping, he said. That's the shape of it, Marcus said. I can't give you a signed document, but the circumstantial chain is tight enough that a good attorney would be interested. Can you tie the holding company to Gideon Vail directly? not directly. One more degree removed. Marcus stopped. In my experience, that's how these things are set up. The person who benefits is never the person who signs. Adrian sat in his car for a long time after he hung up. He thought about the board calls, the performance contingency clause, the 18-month window and the freight projections, and Elena's 4 projection scenarios. She hadn't shown them to him, but he knew she'd run them. Knew it the way he knew how she thought, because he'd spent 6 years watching her mind work, even when she wasn't talking. Thought about Sienna's voice. Every day, you delay hands Gideon, the window he's been waiting for. He thought she'd been the window. He called Sienna. She answered before the second ring. I need you to come to the office, he said. Tonight. A pause. It's 8 o'clock. I know what time it is. She came. She sat across from him, with the same folio on her knee and the same composed expression, and he watched her for a long moment before he said anything, because he wanted to see whether the composure was genuine or performed, and he genuinely couldn't tell, which told him something in itself. You were the primary analyst on the Continental Harbor engagement at Palliser, he said. The composure didn't crack. A slight adjustment in her posture. That was all. I told you I attended a briefing. You told me you attended one preliminary briefing. You were in their executive offices 9 times over 18 months. You were their primary analyst. She was quiet for a moment. I minimized it, she said. I know how it looks. Then tell me how it actually is. She looked at him directly. Her eyes were steady and her voice, when it came, was even. I did the work for Palliser. I was good at it. When an opportunity came to join a company I believed in more, I took it. That's the truth. The search firm that recruited you was retained by a holding company connected to Meridian Capital Partners. A pause. Shorter this time. I didn't know that, she said. No, her voice firmed. Adrian, I took a call from a recruiter. I don't investigate the upstream funding structure of every firm that headhunts me. But you knew who would benefit from your being here. She looked at him. Her jaw was set. I knew Vale Shipping was a strong company with a leadership team that needed fresh strategic thinking. That's what I knew. Did Gideon Vale know you were coming here before you were hired? The silence that followed was 3 seconds long. Elena would have answered immediately, he thought, even to deny it. She would have answered immediately because she didn't calculate the pause. I think you should talk to your attorneys, Sienna said. I'm talking to you, and I'm telling you that I have done nothing improper. Everything I've recommended has been in the company's interest. If you found some downstream connection in Meridian's structure that concerns you, that's a concern worth raising. But it's not my concern. I didn't structure Meridian. No, he said. You just recommended them. She stood. The folio was in both hands now, held tight. I've been loyal to this company. I've been loyal to you. I've worked 80-hour weeks for 18 months to build something worth protecting. And I am not going to sit here while you suggest otherwise based on what? Her mouth closed. Based on what, Sienna? Her chin lifted slightly. Based on whatever your wife has been feeding you from the house. The room went quiet. He looked at her for a long time. Get out, he said. She left. He sat at his desk. The office was empty. The floor below him hummed with the ventilation system, and outside the city's lights were cold and white against a dark sky. He should call Elena. He knew that. He picked up his phone and looked at her name in his contacts, and sat there with it in his hand. He didn't call her. Instead, he opened the restructuring agreement on his screen. Read through the performance contingency clause again. Read it carefully, the way Elena had told him to read it 11 days ago. The 18-month window. The freight targets. The outside management group. Meridian Capital Partners stepping in if targets were missed. He thought, I've been running the freight projections from Sienna's models. He sat with that for a moment. Then he pulled up the raw freight data. The actual numbers, unprocessed, before they'd gone through Sienna's analytical framework, and started running his own projections. It took him 2 hours. 3 of his 4 scenarios missed the targets. The 4th required a 14% growth in Pacific route volume. He sat at his desk at 11:30 at night, with the city lights below him and the restructuring agreement on one screen and his freight projections on the other, and he understood with a clarity that was almost physical something that landed in his chest like a stone exactly what he had been about to sign, and why and who had arranged for all of it. His wife had known. She had known for weeks, and she had not saved him. He sat with that too. Longer. Then he picked up the phone and called Marcus Dell again. I need you to go deeper on Meridian, he said, all 3 subsidiaries. Full board history. Any connection to Gideon Vale's personal accounts, not just the company. Timeline? 48 hours. That's aggressive. I know. He hung up and sat in the empty office. He was going to deal with Gideon. He was going to deal with Meridian and the board calls and the performance contingency clause and all of it. But first, he picked up his phone again and called Elena. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. He sat there, listened to her voice on the outgoing message low, direct, no excess words, and when the beep came, he said, "I need to talk to you when I get home." "I'm sorry it took me this long." He drove home. She was asleep, the lamp off, her breathing slow and steady, one hand resting on the swell of her stomach. He stood in the doorway for a long time. He thought he knew what she'd tell him in the morning. He thought he deserved to hear it. He got into bed carefully, so as not to wake her, and lay in the dark on his side of the mattress, and he did not sleep at all. At 6:15 she stirred, turned, looked at him in the gray early light, looked at him with the particular directness she'd always had, the look that saw past the thing you were presenting to the thing you actually were. "You ran the freight projections," she said. "It wasn't a question. Last night," he said. She held his gaze. Her face was tired and careful and entirely clear. "I need to know something," she said. He waited, the agreement. Her voice was even. "Did you sign it?" He looked at the ceiling. The light was coming in gray and thin around the edges of the curtains. "Not yet," he said. She said nothing. "I'm going to deal with it," he said. "I'm going to." Her voice was quiet, not gentle, not angry. Just exact. "Did you call outside counsel?" He hadn't. She turned onto her back and looked at the ceiling. "The signing is scheduled for Friday," she said. "That's 4 days." "I know. And you still haven't engaged outside counsel. And you haven't told the board. And you haven't formally put Sienna on notice." She paused. "And Marcus Dell's findings aren't legally admissible without independent corroboration." He stared at the ceiling. "How long have you been building a file?" he said. Silence. "Elena." "Since the night I found the Meridian documents on your desk," she said. He turned his head. She was still looking at the ceiling. Her jaws was set. There was something in her profile, in the stillness of her, in the contained precision of it, that he recognized but couldn't name. Something his father had tried to describe to him once, years ago, in a conversation Adrian had filed away without fully understanding. "She knows more than you think," Robert had said. "She always will. Don't make the mistake of believing that means she'll always tell you." He'd thought his father was talking about something else at the time. "What's in the file?" he said. She turned her head and looked at him, and she said, "Enough." That one word landed in the room and stayed there, and Adrian Vale, who had spent his entire professional life being the smartest person in every room he entered, who had built a $2 billion company on the certainty of his own judgment, felt, for the first time in longer than he could remember, the specific and absolute discomfort of not knowing what came next. She held his gaze a moment longer. Then she reached for the glass of water on her nightstand, took a slow sip and set it back down. "You have 4 days," she said. "I'd start making calls." She got out of bed. He lay there and listened to her move down the hallway toward the kitchen, and he thought about the archive boxes in the guest room, and his father's handwriting on an envelope he hadn't known existed, and the photograph of an infant in a box marked Miscellaneous R, V Personal, and the 4 words on the back of it that he didn't know yet. He thought, "There is something I'm missing." He thought, "She knows what it is." And he thought, staring at the ceiling in the gray morning light, with 4 days left until Friday, "I have spent the last 6 months making decisions without the one person in this company I should never have let go. And I am going to feel the full weight of that before this is over." He was right. Adrian made 7 calls before 8 in the morning. He made them from the kitchen, standing at the counter with a cup of coffee going cold beside him, because Elena was in the shower and he didn't want to be sitting down when he did this. Sitting felt like waiting. He was done waiting. The first call was to Patricia Osi. He'd found her name in Elena's contacts 3 months ago, had seen it on her phone screen when she'd left it face up on the kitchen table, and had not asked about it because he'd told himself it was probably a social acquaintance, probably nothing, because that was what he did when he didn't want to know something. He called her now because she was a corporate governance attorney who didn't report to him, and because Elena had told him 11 days ago to find one, and he was 11 days late. Patricia Osi answered on the second ring, with the clipped alertness of someone who had already been working for an hour. "My name is Adrian Vale," he said. "I need outside counsel on a corporate governance emergency." "I've been told you're the right person." A pause. Brief. Measuring. "Who told you that?" she said. "Elena Marlowe." Another pause. Longer. "Then, I'm going to need you to hold for 2 minutes." She put him on hold. He stood at the counter and listened to silence and drank his cold coffee and looked at the kitchen window. where the morning was coming in thin and gray. 2 minutes and 14 seconds later, she came back. "Mr. Vale," she said, and her voice had changed, still professional, still clipped, but with something underneath it, now that he recognized as the particular alertness of someone who already knows the shape of the problem you're about to describe. "Tell me what you're dealing with," he told her. "All of it. The restructuring agreement, the performance contingency clause, the Meridian connection to Gideon's company, Sienna's true role at Palliser, the search firm's upstream funding structure, Marcus Dell's findings." He talked for 11 minutes without stopping. Patricia Osei did not interrupt him once. When he finished, she said, "The signing is Friday." "Yes." "It's Tuesday morning." "Yes." "You don't have 48 hours for Dell's independent corroboration." "I know." "Then here's what you're going to do," she said. "You're going to send me everything Dell has found, everything your wife has documented, and the original restructuring agreement in the next 90 minutes. I'm going to read it. Then we're going to talk again at noon, and I'm going to tell you whether we have enough to go to the board before Friday or whether we need a different approach." "What kind of different approach?" She paused. "Let's see what you have first." He hung up and stood there for a moment. Then he turned around. Elena was in the kitchen doorway. She had her hair still damp, wearing the gray sweater again. He realized the same one she'd worn the morning he'd dismissed her Meridian concerns at breakfast. She was watching him with her arms folded loosely across her stomach, and her face carrying the expression he'd seen in the bedroom. Not accusation, not satisfaction, just the clear, exact attention of someone reading what was in front of them. "Patricia Osei," he said. She nodded once. "You've already talked to her," he said. "Yes." "How long ago?" She held his gaze. 3 weeks. He absorbed that. 3 weeks ago, he had been sitting at this kitchen table, telling her the Meridian connection was indirect and non-material, and watching her say, "Okay," in a voice that meant something else. 3 weeks ago, she had already called an outside attorney. "What did she tell you?" he said. "That the instrument I'm holding is enforceable, and that I should wait until the agreement was signed, and the transfer was pending before activating it." "The instrument," he stopped. "What instrument?" Elena looked at him for a moment. Then she pulled out the chair across from him, the one she always sat in, and lowered herself into it with the careful deliberation of a woman 8 months pregnant, who was tired in a way that went past sleep. "Sit down," she said. "There are things I need to tell you." She told him about the envelope, about the photograph, about her mother and Harlan Cross, and the dormant protective clause that Robert Vale had filed under the original 1993 corporate charter and placed in the name of a paralegal's infant daughter because he'd believed she was the only person outside the family who could be trusted with it. Adrian sat across from her at the kitchen table and did not move. She laid it out evenly. No drama, no softening. Just the facts in sequence, the way she always delivered difficult information, as though the truth was the truth, and the only question was whether you were ready to hear it. When she finished, the kitchen was very quiet. He looked at the table surface, then at his hands, then at her. "You put it in your name," he said. "Yes. You've been holding a controlling protective clause in my company's charter for 33 years. Since I was 8 weeks old." "Yes, and you didn't tell me." She held his gaze. "I didn't know until 3 weeks ago. But when you found out." "When I found out," she said, "I had just seen you kiss Sienna Cross in your office, and you'd already dismissed my concerns about Meridian. And when I told you to go to outside counsel, you said, 'I'll follow up today,' and then went back to your coffee." He opened his mouth. "I'm not saying it to hurt you," she said. "I'm saying it because it's accurate." He closed his mouth. She pressed her palms flat on the table and looked at him directly. "What I'm holding is a protection for the company's employees and assets. That's what Robert built it for. That's what I intend to use it for. Not to save your position. Not to punish you, not to win anything." She paused. "But I needed to know first that you were actually ready to deal with what's in front of you instead of managing it. And now? You called Patricia at 7:45 in the morning." She looked at the window, then back at him. "That's something." He laughed. It came out wrong, short and humorless and slightly broken. He pressed his knuckles against his mouth and looked at the ceiling and got it under control. "Okay," he said. "Okay. Patricia's expecting the files in 90 minutes. Send her mine," Elena said. "All of it. You'll share the file. The goal is stopping the transfer. That requires everything we have." She pushed back from the table. "Send it, all of it." He sent it. At noon, he was at the office, in a conference room with the door locked, on a call with Patricia Osei that lasted 47 minutes. Patricia had read everything. Her assessment was precise and in several places uncomfortable. Your wife's documentation is significantly stronger than Dell's, she said. The Palliser employment records, the building access logs, the search firm upstream structure. She's an independent corroboration on each of those points that Dell's findings lack. Where did she get the building access logs? I don't know, he said. A pause. You should ask her, I will. The protective clause is valid and enforceable. I've verified the 1993 filing. Harlan Cross's drafting is solid, unconventional, but solid. If Elena activates it, the freeze is immediate and the 90-day audit clock starts regardless of what anyone does to challenge it. Can we use that as leverage with the board before Friday? Tell them what we have and ask them to pull the agreement off the table voluntarily. Patricia was quiet for a moment. That depends on how many board members Gideon's people have already reached. He felt something cold move through his chest. You think he's been working the board? The timeline suggests it, she said. The calls you've been getting from board members? You said they started 4 weeks ago? About that. And Gideon's publicly been quiet for how long? 8 months. 8 months of quiet right before a restructuring agreement surfaces that, if activated correctly, hands him operational control. Yes, I think he's been working the board. She let that sit. If you go to them transparently, and half of them are already committed to Gideon's position, you hand him warning. He accelerates. He may have contingencies you haven't found yet. Adrian sat in the locked conference room and looked at the wall. Then what's the play, he said. You let him sign it, Patricia said. He went still. Elena waits until the agreement is signed and the transfer is legally pending. Then she activates the clause. The freeze hits Meridian before they can move. The 90-day audit becomes public record. Gideon's connections surface in the investigation. And you, she paused. You have to be willing to stand in front of the board and admit what happened. All of it, including the affair, silence on the line. That's your call, Patricia said. But if Sienna is going to be removed from the company, and she needs to be, the board is going to ask questions about your judgment in hiring her. You're better off getting in front of it. He put his hand flat on the table, pressed down, felt the solid, cold surface of it. There's one more problem, Patricia said. For this to work, you have to let the agreement get to signing. You can't pull it. You can't slow it. If Gideon or Sienna suspect the play has changed, they'll accelerate their own timeline, and you may lose the window. I have to pretend nothing has changed. Until Friday. Yes. He thought about sitting across from Sienna in his office last night, watching her jaw set when he'd pressed her, the 3-second pause before she'd said she didn't know about the search firm connection. She's going to know something is wrong, he said. Then you need to be convincing, Patricia said. I assume you know how. He did. He'd spent 20 years in rooms where the wrong expression cost millions of dollars. He knew how to hold his face. He just never had to hold it against someone who was sitting inside his own executive floor. Friday, he said. Friday, Patricia confirmed. Tell Elena to have the activation documents ready. The moment the agreement is signed, we move. He hung up. He sat in the locked conference room for 4 minutes, alone, his hands flat on the table, breathing the recycled air. Then he straightened his jacket, stood up, unlocked the door, walked out into the corridor and took the elevator back to his floor. And when he passed Sienna's office and she looked up from her desk and met his eyes through the glass, he nodded at her once easy, neutral, the nod of a man who had thought it over and come to terms with the path forward. She nodded back. He kept walking. Wednesday passed. Thursday arrived and turned slowly, the way days do when you're waiting for something that cannot be rushed. Adrian moved through both days with the performance of a man who had resolved his doubts and recommitted to the plan. He attended the pre-signing briefing on Thursday afternoon. He asked 2 careful questions, the kind of questions that signaled diligence, not suspicion. He shook hands with Lassiter afterward. He told Sienna in the elevator at the end of the day that he felt good about Friday. She searched his face. He held it. I'm glad, she said. He went home Thursday evening and found Elena at the kitchen table with her laptop and a printed copy of the activation documents, which she'd already reviewed with Patricia twice. She had a red pen, and there were small, precise marks in the margins. He sat down across from her. Tomorrow, he said, I know. She looked up. Her face was tired. The specific exhaustion of the 3rd trimester, compounded by 3 weeks of controlled, careful, relentless work, dark beneath her eyes, a tension at the corners of her mouth. She was 37 weeks pregnant, and she had been holding this alone, almost entirely alone. Since the afternoon, she'd stood in a corridor and watched her marriage end. Patricia will be on standby. The moment you confirm the signing is complete, I activate. You understand what happens after, he said. The freeze hits. The audit starts. Gideon's connection becomes discoverable in the investigation. She looked at him steadily. Yes, I understand. And Sienna gets removed. Yes. He was quiet for a moment, and she held his gaze. Said nothing, Elena. One thing at a time, she said. Tomorrow first, he didn't push. He made dinner pasta. The simple kind, the only kind he reliably made without error. And they ate together without speaking much. And it was not comfortable, but it was honest, which was more than they'd managed in months. He did the dishes. She went to bed early. He stood at the kitchen window for a long time after, looking at the garden, and then he went out to the Zooms and sat on the floor in front of the archive boxes and looked at the one marked Miscellaneous R. Be personal, he opened it. He was not sure what he expected to find. The envelope Elena had described was gone. She'd taken it to Noah's room, but he went through the box slowly, page by page, the way he should have done in the 4 years since his father's death and hadn't, because grief took the shape of avoidance sometimes, and he'd never been good at sitting with things he couldn't fix. He found his father's personal correspondence from 9,991 through 994. Letters mostly his father had been a letter writer, in an era that was already moving past letters. He read 3 of them before he found the one that mattered. It was addressed to Harlan Cross, dated October 1993, 3 paragraphs. The first paragraph discussed a client matter that Adrian didn't recognize. The second discussed a personal loan repayment that was also unfamiliar. The third paragraph read, I've done what we discussed. The instrument is filed. I've named the girl Margaret's daughter. She's too young to know any of this, and I hope she never needs to. But if she does need it, she'll be ready. Margaret raised her right. I could see it already, 8 weeks in. Some people carry something in them from the start. This one does. If my sons fail her the way they fail each other, she'll be the one standing when it's over. I'd rather build something that survives than protect something that doesn't deserve to. Don't tell Adrian. He'd try to control it. That's his nature. It's also his limitation. R.V. Adrian sat on the floor of the guest room for a long time with the letter in his hands. He didn't tell Adrian. He'd try to control it. That's his nature. It's also his limitation. He thought about 20 years of boardrooms. 20 years of being the smartest person in the room and making sure everyone knew it. 20 years of Elena beside him, brilliant, precise, tireless, and the slow, stupid, catastrophic mistake of treating her like a resource instead of a partner. He put the letter back in the box. He closed the box. He went to bed. Friday came in cold and overcast, a gray May morning with low cloud and the smell of rain that hadn't arrived yet. Adrian was dressed by 6:30. Elena was already in the kitchen, coffee in hand, the activation documents in a neat folder on the table beside her laptop. She was dressed too. Not for the office, but in real clothes, the kind she wore when she meant to be ready for something. He looked at her. She looked at him. I read his letter, he said. In the archive box, the one to Harlan. She went still. He knew, Adrian said. He'd known from the beginning what you were, what you'd be. He paused. His voice was controlled, but only just. He trusted you more than he trusted me. She held his gaze. Her face was careful, and her eyes were clear, and she did not offer him comfort, because it wasn't the moment for comfort, and she knew it. He was right to, she said quietly. He nodded, once. The nod of a man receiving a true thing he'd already known, and wasn't ready to argue with. I'll call you the moment it's done, he said. He drove to the office. The signing was scheduled for 10 o'clock in the main conference room on the 32nd floor. 12 people around a table, Adrian, Lassiter, 4 board members, Sienna, 2 Meridian Capital Partners representatives, and their respective legal counsel. The Meridian representatives were a man named Fowler and a woman named Kase. They arrived at 9:55 in dark suits, carrying identical black portfolios, and moved through the room with the ease of people who believed they already owned the outcome. Sienna sat at Adrian's right. She was composed, more composed than she'd been Thursday evening in the elevator, which registered somewhere in the back of his attention, the way a small sound registers when you're listening for it. The agreement was executed in stages, each section initialed, then signed. Lassiter walked the table through each clause. Adrian initialed. The board members initialed. Fowler and Kase initialed on Meridian's behalf. They reached the performance contingency clause. Adrian initialed it. He did not look at Sienna. He did not look at the Meridian representatives. He looked at the page and he moved his pen and he thought, Patricia is standing by. Elena has the documents ready. The moment this is complete. They reached the final signature page. Adrian signed. The room let out a collective breath, not audible exactly, but present, the physical release of 12 people who had been holding something in. Fowler reached across the table and shook Adrian's hand. "Congratulations," Fowler said. "We're looking forward to the partnership." "So am I," Adrian said. He picked up his phone. "Type 3 words to Elena. It's done. Send." Then he set the phone face down on the table and looked across at Sienna. She was watching him. Her expression was smooth and professional, and he could not read past it. He'd never been able to read past it. He understood that now, because he'd never been looking for what was actually there. "Sienna," he said, "can you stay after?" She nodded. The room began to clear. The Meridian representatives gathered their portfolios. Lassiter spoke quietly with board counsel in the doorway. People moved through the small logistical motions of an event that had ended. Adrian's phone lit up on the table. He turned it over. One word from Patricia, activated. He looked at the word for a moment. Then he put the phone in his pocket. Sienna was the last one left beside him at the table. The door was closed. The room was empty. She looked at him with the particular alert stillness of someone who had read the temperature of the last 10 minutes and found something in it she wasn't sure about. She stopped. "What?" he said. "Calm," she said. "You seemed very calm through all of that, did I?" He looked at her. Not with anger, he was past that. With something colder and more precise. "Sienna, I'm going to ask you something, and I need you to understand that whatever you say next is being considered in the context of everything I now know about your role at Palliser, your connection to Meridian's upstream structure, and the search firm that was retained, using a holding company linked to Meridian to place you at Vale Shipping." She did not move. "Did Gideon Vale know you were coming to this company before the search firm contacted you?" Silence. The ventilation system hummed. Outside the windows, the overcast sky had darkened. Sienna's hands were flat on the table. She was very still. And then, slowly, something changed in her face. Not a crack, not a collapse, but a particular settling. The kind that happens when a person decides that the shape of what they were performing is no longer worth the energy of maintaining it. She looked at him. "He reached out to me," she said, "before Palliser. He knew my work from the Continental Harbor engagement. He suggested that there might be an opportunity at Vale Shipping if I was patient." A pause. "I was patient." Adrian absorbed that. "You came here to deliver the company to him," he said. "I came here to do a job," she said. The job evolved. "You were never—" He stopped. Looked at the table. "You were never interested in me, any of it." Her chin lifted, just slightly. The performance contingency clause was the mechanism. Your personal situation made it easier to keep you from listening to the people who might have seen it coming. He looked at her then fully directly. "Elena," he said. "Your wife is perceptive," Sienna said. Her voice was even, unhurried, as though they were discussing a completed project. She was the primary obstacle from the beginning. Your decision to distance yourself from her professionally was convenient. The room was very quiet. "You helped engineer that," he said. She said nothing. The comments, the framing, the way you positioned her concerns as pregnancy stress. His voice stayed level. It cost him something to keep it there. "You worked that from the inside." She tilted her head. "You made every choice yourself, Adrian, that landed the way she meant it to. True enough that it couldn't be entirely deflected." "Yes," he said, "I did." He picked up his phone, opened it, held it across the table so she could see the screen. Patricia's message, one word, activated, and below it a forwarded notification from Patricia to his email, time-stamped 11 minutes ago, confirming that the protective clause had been filed with the corporate registrar and that all pending external transfers of operational governance under the Vale Shipping restructuring agreement were frozen pending independent audit. Sienna looked at the screen. He watched her read it, watched the composure recalibrate, not fall apart but shift, rearranging itself around a new set of facts. "That's not possible," she said. "There's no mechanism in the agreement." "Not in the agreement," he said. "In the original 1993 charter." She looked up at him. "My father filed a protective instrument 30 years ago," he said, "named holder, independent of executive control. If Vale Shipping faces an unauthorized external transfer of operational governance, the holder can freeze all pending transfers and trigger an independent audit. 90 days. Mandatory. Public record." Her face was doing something he'd never seen it do before. Not fear. She was too controlled for what most people would call fear. Something more, like the expression of a person watching the architecture of a structure they trusted reveal itself as entirely different from what they'd been told. "Who holds it?" she said. He held her gaze. My wife, he said. Sienna was quiet for 3 seconds. Then she said, Gideon needs to know. Gideon's going to know in about 4 hours, Adrian said when his attorneys call him. Because the freeze notification went to every party named in the restructuring agreement, including Meridian Capital Partners, which means it went to every entity upstream of Meridian, which means it went to the holding company connected to Gideon's personal accounts. He stood. He already knows. He just doesn't know what to do about it yet. She looked at him. I need you to clear your office today, he said. HR will meet you when you come out of this room. You'll be placed on paid administrative leave pending the investigation. Do not contact Meridian. Do not contact Gideon. Do not contact anyone connected to this agreement. He paused. And don't make me call security. I'd rather not. She stood, picked up her portfolio. At the door she stopped. He thought she was going to say something. One last thing. The kind of parting line that a person with her composure might have prepared for contingencies. But she didn't. She looked at him for a long moment, and then she looked past him, out the window, at the dark gray sky. Then she opened the door and walked out. He stood at the end of the conference table alone. His phone buzzed. Patricia, board notification sent. Investigation triggered. You should call Marcus. He called Marcus. Del, Marcus said. It's done, Adrian said. The freeze is active. A pause. Gideon's people have already called 2 board members. I have a source inside his operation. Adrian went still. What did they say? They're accelerating. They're trying to call an emergency board session to challenge the validity of the clause, claiming that it's not enforceable under current corporate governance code because it predates the 2003 charter revision. He pressed his hand against the glass, cold, solid. Is that a legitimate argument? It's an argument, Marcus said. Whether it's legitimate depends on the judge. If they can get a temporary injunction on the freeze, they could restart the transfer clock while the challenge works through the courts. Adrian stared at the gray sky. How fast can they move? They already have a filing drafted, Marcus said. I found a law firm that's been on retainer for Gideon's holding company for 6 months, a firm that specializes in corporate charter disputes. They've been sitting on a challenge document. They just needed the event to trigger it. They'd planned for the clause, he thought. They'd known about it, or at least known enough to prepare a response to it. How, he said, that I don't have yet. He hung up and stood at the glass for a moment. Then he called Patricia. She answered in one word, I know. They have a filing ready, he said. I know, they submitted it 40 minutes ago. I've already pulled it. Her voice was controlled and rapid. The argument is based on the 2003 revision standardization clause. They're claiming the protective instrument is superseded. It's a legitimate legal argument. It's not a strong one Harlan Cross anticipated a challenge like this and built-in language that addresses the standardization clause specifically. But it's going to take time to argue, and the judge they drew for the emergency filing is, she paused, not the judge I would have chosen. Can we hold the freeze while it's argued? I believe so, but I can't guarantee it. Another pause. Adrian, I need to tell you something. He waited. The document Gideon's attorneys filed, she said. It cites the existence of the protective instrument by name, the specific filing date, the specific mechanism. Her voice was precise and flat. They knew about it, in detail. Before today, the gray sky outside the window had begun to release its rain fine, cold, barely visible. That information, Patricia said, is not public. It's not in any searchable record. It was in Harlan Cross's private files and in the Vale Shipping Charter archive. Adrian thought about the archive boxes in the guest room. The box marked Miscellaneous RV Personal. The envelope with Elena's name on it in his father's handwriting. Someone accessed the archive, he said. Someone knew what to look for, Patricia said, which means someone knew the instrument existed long before Elena found the photograph. He turned away from the window. If they knew it existed, he said, they would have needed to neutralize Elena before she could use it. He said it, and then he understood what he'd just said, and he was already picking up his phone and calling Elena before Patricia could respond. 4 rings. 5 her voicemail. He called again. 2 rings and voicemail. He grabbed his jacket from the back of his chair and was out of the conference room in 4 steps, down the corridor toward the elevator, his hand already on his phone, calling again. And this time it rang once and went directly to voicemail, which meant it had been powered off, which meant he got in the elevator. Hit the lobby button. Called Marcus. I need someone at my house, he said. Right now. I don't know yet. His voice was flat. He could feel his own heartbeat. Go now on it. The elevator doors opened. He was through the lobby and out the building door into the cold, fine rain before the doorman could move. And he was in his car in 90 seconds and on the expressway in 3 minutes, running the math in his head 15 minutes to the house. Marcus's man was closer. Patricia was filing the charter defense. The injunction was already moving. His phone rang. Unknown number, he answered. Mr. Vale. The voice was male, unhurried. My name isn't something you need to know. I'm calling on behalf of an interested party who wants to make sure you understand the situation clearly before you make any more decisions today. Where is my wife? Adrian said, a pause. Your wife is at your home, the voice said. She's perfectly safe. She'll remain that way, as long as this situation resolves the way it should. He kept his hands on the wheel. His knuckles were white. What do you want? He said. The activation needs to be reversed, the voice said. Ms. Marlowe needs to withdraw the protective clause, filing and sign a letter of relinquishment transferring the instrument to the interested party. The documents are already prepared. Once that's done, she remains safe. The situation resolves cleanly, and everyone moves forward. Rain on the windshield. The expressway opening up in front of him, gray and wet. If she doesn't, he said, then the investigation your outside counsel triggered is going to surface some things that are personally damaging to Ms. Marlowe. Things about how she obtained certain employment records, certain building access logs. A pause. Things that would constitute unauthorized access to private corporate records. I imagine, at 37 weeks pregnant, she would prefer not to be managing a criminal complaint. He thought about the building access logs. He'd asked Patricia how Elena had gotten them, and Patricia had said ask her. He hadn't. He thought about Elena in the kitchen saying enough, and meaning it. He drove. You have 2 hours, the voice said. The relinquishment document is being delivered to your home now. The line went dead. He drove faster. The rain was heavier now, coming down in sheets against the windshield, and his hands were white on the wheel, and his chest was tight, and he drove, and he thought, she has been alone in that house, holding all of this for 3 weeks, and I have been sitting in offices managing my performance, and now they are at my door with a document and a threat and a deadline, and the one thing, the one instrument, the one structural protection, the one thing his father had placed in her hands 30 years ago, against exactly this kind of moment, is what they want her to sign away. He thought, she will not sign it. He thought, she knows what it means to sign it. He thought, she is 37 weeks pregnant and alone and someone is at her door. He pressed the accelerator down and the car surged forward into the rain, and he called her number again and again. It went to voicemail. And he held the phone against his ear and listened to her voice saying, leave a message, and thought, with a clarity that left no room for anything else, I should never have let it get here. I should never have made her carry this alone. He made it to the house in 11 minutes. He would not remember the drive later. Not the route, not the lights, not the rain hammering the windshield in sheets that the wipers couldn't fully clear. He would remember his hands on the wheel and the sound of Elena's voicemail, playing over and over through the car's speakers, and the specific quality of silence between each unanswered ring, a silence that had weight, that pressed against his chest and didn't let go. He turned into the driveway, and the car wasn't fully stopped when he got out. The front door was unlocked. He pushed through it and stood in the entryway and said her name. Kitchen. Her voice. Steady, present. He moved down the hall and through the kitchen doorway, and she was there sitting at the kitchen table, both hands flat on the surface in front of her, her face pale but controlled. Across the table from her sat a man he didn't recognize. 50s, gray at the temples, dark jacket, leather portfolio open in front of him. Beside the portfolio, a document. Beside the document, a pen. The man looked up when Adrian came in. Mr. Vale, he said. Adrian looked at Elena. She was looking at him. Her eyes were clear, and her jaw was set, and she was doing the thing she always did under pressure, going very still, pulling everything inward, not letting the surface crack. But her left hand, the one nearest him, had its fingers pressed so hard into the table that the knuckles were white. Are you all right? He said. Yes. One more. Flat. He looked at the man. Get out of my house. The man didn't move. He had the particular stillness of someone who had been in rooms where people told him to leave before. I think it would be worth taking a few minutes to discuss the document. I said, get out. Your wife hasn't signed yet. He looked at Elena. I was explaining the terms. I heard the terms, Elena said. Her voice was even, unhurried, as though we're discussing a shipping clause. Relinquishment of the protective instrument in exchange for the complaint about the building access logs not moving forward. That's the shape of it, the man said, and if I don't sign, Then the complaint goes to the DA's office this afternoon. Unauthorized access to private corporate records. Given the circumstances, his eyes moved to her stomach briefly. The timing would be unfortunate. The room was very quiet. Adrian crossed to the table in 4 steps and picked up the document and read the first 2 paragraphs. His eyes moved fast. He'd been reading contracts for 20 years. He knew what he was looking at in 30 seconds. It was a relinquishment and assignment. Complete. Irrevocable. The protective clause would transfer to a named holding entity, Crestfield Management, LLC, upon signature. He recognized Crestfield. It was in Marcus's files. 3 degrees from Gideon's personal accounts. He set the document back on the table. "She's not signing this," he said. "Mr. Vale, you drove to my house. You sat across from my 37-week pregnant wife. You put a document in front of her and told her that if she didn't sign it, you'd file a criminal complaint." He looked at the man directly. His voice was controlled. He was spending real effort on that control, and the man could probably see it. That's criminal coercion. "I have a corporate investigator and an outside counsel who are both currently active on this matter. The moment you walked into my house, you became part of their file." The man's expression didn't shift. "The building access logs were obtained using an access code that was never formally revoked," Adrian said. "She didn't break into anything. She used credentials that remained valid because no one had the competence to deactivate them." He leaned forward slightly. "That's an HR failure, not a criminal act, and any prosecutor who looks at it for 5 minutes will tell you the same thing. A beat." "The interested party," the man started. "Tell the interested party that my wife isn't signing anything. Tell him the freeze is active and the investigation is running. And if he has a legitimate legal argument about the 1993 charter instrument, he can make it in court." Adrian straightened. "And tell him that the next person who comes to my house will be meeting the police at the driveway." The man looked at Elena. She looked back at him, said nothing. He closed the portfolio, picked up the unsigned document, stewed. At the kitchen door he stopped. They always stopped at doors, Adrian thought, all of them, as though the threshold gave them one last moment of authority. 2 hours, the man said. He left. The front door opened and closed. Adrian stood at the kitchen table and listened to the sound of a car reversing out of the driveway. Then he pulled out the chair beside Elena and sat down heavily, his elbows on the table, his hands pressed against his face. "Your phone," he said through his hands. "They took it when they came in. I got it back when they decided to wait for you." Her voice was still level. "I tried to call you. I know. It was going straight to voicemail. They'd turned it off." He lowered his hands, looked at her. She was still pale, still precise, still holding herself with the same terrible controlled stillness. But her left hand had released the table surface and now lay in her lap, and he could see, looking at it, that it was shaking slightly. Just slightly. The only thing she hadn't been able to hold. "Elena." "I'm fine," she said. "Your hand, I'm fine." She looked at the window. The rain was still coming. "The baby's fine." I checked. "I've been monitoring since they came in." She pressed her palm against her stomach. "Fine." He reached across the table. She looked at his hand. She didn't take it, but she didn't pull away either. She just looked at it for a moment, the way she looked at things she was still deciding about, and then she looked back at the window. "They knew about the clause," she said. "Before I found the photograph. They knew it existed." Patricia said the same thing, which means someone accessed the charter archive, the original filing. She was working it in that way she had linearly, each piece placed before the next. Harlan Cross's files, or the corporate registrar, or someone inside the company who knew where to look. She turned her head. Her eyes sharpened. Lassiter. He held her gaze. "I don't know yet. He's been with the company 11 years. He would have known where the historical charter files were kept." She pressed her lips together. "He told you the Meridian connection was non-material. He told you the Palliser employment documentation was complete without verifying it independently. He's been running interference." "I know." If he told Gideon's people about the clause, then they had time to prepare the court challenge, which is why the filing was ready the moment the freeze activated. He nodded slowly. "I know. I've already thought of it." She looked at him. "I should have thought of it a week ago," he said. She didn't say anything to that. She didn't have to. He picked up his phone and called Patricia. She answered in one ring. The man with the document left. She didn't sign. Good. "The court challenge is moving faster than I expected. They have a hearing scheduled for 3 o'clock this afternoon. Emergency injunction to freeze the freeze." A pause. "I need Elena in my office now if possible." He looked at Elena. She was already standing, pulling her jacket from the back of the chair. "We'll be there in 20 minutes, he said. Patricia Osie's office was on the 14th floor of a building 12 blocks from Vail Shipping's tower. Clean lines, minimal furniture, 3 whiteboards covered in case notes that she turned face to wall when clients came in. She was 54 compact, with close-cropped gray hair and reading glasses she took off and held in her hand when she was thinking hard and put back on when she'd decided something. They were in her conference room by 11:40. Patricia had 2 associates with her, both young, both with a specific focused energy of people who hadn't sat down in several hours. Case files on the table, a laptop open, the charter document, the full 1,993 filing, Harlan Cross's original printed and tabbed. But Patricia looked at Elena when they came in. A look that was quick and complete. "How are you?" she said. "Ready," Elena said. Patricia nodded. Sat down. The challenge is based on the 2003 standardization clause. Their argument is that when the charter was revised in 2003, all pre-existing contingent instruments were superseded unless explicitly refiled under the new framework. She opened the charter document to a tabbed page. Harlan Cross anticipated this. Section 12, subsection D preservation language. He wrote it in 9,993, but he wrote it to survive exactly this kind of revision challenge. "Will the judge see it that way?" Adrian said. "The language is strong, but it's a 3 o'clock emergency hearing, which means we're arguing cold in front of a judge who has 40 minutes to form an opinion before they decide whether to grant a temporary injunction." She set her glasses down. "What could hurt us is if they can establish that the original filing was procedurally defective. Their filing includes a claim that the instrument wasn't properly disclosed to the corporate registrar at the time of the 2003 revision. Was it?" Isena said. "No," Patricia said, "but it wasn't required to be." That's the argument. She looked at Elena. "I need you to testify at 3 o'clock. The judge needs to hear from the named holder directly." Elena looked at her. "Testify to what specifically?" "Your intent. The legitimacy of the instrument. The chain of custody from Robert Vail through Harlan Cross to you." She paused. "And the circumstances of the activation, why you activated it, what you were protecting, and that you acted in good faith." "What about the building access logs?" Adrian said. Patricia's gaze moved to Elena. Waited. Elena looked at the table for a moment. Then she said, "I used my Vail shipping credentials. They were never revoked. I accessed the freight analytics platform and the employment records database. The employment records database. I used a lookup function that required departmental clearance that I technically held under my original hire classification, which was never formally changed during my medical leave." She paused. "It was borderline." "How borderline?" Patricia said. "The function required departmental head clearance. I held departmental head classification on my original employment contract. Whether that classification remained active during medical leave is," she stopped, "arguable." "Will Gideon's people argue it?" "They already are," Elena said. "That was the threat this morning." Patricia was quiet for a moment. "I can manage it. If they raise it at 3 o'clock, I have a response. But you need to know it might come up." "I know," Elena said. "You're 37 weeks pregnant, and you're about to walk into an emergency hearing, where opposing counsel has been preparing for 6 months, and we have had approximately 4 hours. Patricia looked at her directly. "I need you clear. Tell me if you're not." Elena held her gaze. "I'm clear." Patricia put her glasses back on. "Then let's go through what you're going to say." They were in the courthouse by 2:30. The hearing room was small, not a full courtroom, a motion hearing room on the 3rd floor, with fluorescent lighting and wooden chairs that had seen decades of hard use. The judge was a woman named Whitmore, 60-something, with the particular expression of a jurist who had seen every variety of corporate emergency and was not easily impressed by the urgency of any of them. Gideon Vail's legal team occupied the right side of the room. 4 attorneys, 2 paralegals, a woman Adrian didn't recognize who sat slightly apart from the group and watched everything with the attention of someone being paid specifically to watch. Gideon himself was not there. He never would be. That was how he worked, present in the outcome, absent from the process. Adrian sat at Patricia's left. Elena sat at Patricia's right, her folder of documents in her lap, her hands still. She had not looked at the opposing counsel table since they'd walked in. The hearing began at 3:02. Gideon's lead attorney was a man named Hargrove, 60, silver-haired, the kind of polish that came from spending 40 years arguing in rooms exactly like this one. He stood and delivered the argument with the fluency of someone reciting something he'd written months ago, which he had. The 2003 standardization clause, the non-disclosure at revision, the procedural deficiency, the need for an emergency injunction to preserve the status quo while the validity question was properly argued. He used the phrase procedural deficiency 11 times. Elena counted. Patricia rose when Hargrove sat. She did not use notes. She had the charter document in one hand and her glasses in the other, and she argued for 12 minutes without stopping, precise and unhurried, building the case the way Harlan Cross had built the instrument, anticipating the challenge, addressing it directly, leaving no space for the opposing wedge to find purchase. Section 12, subsection D, preservation language. Explicit and deliberate. Cross's intent documented in the filing preamble. The 2003 revision standardization clause applied to operational instruments, not protective trust instruments filed under the Charter's foundational provisions. Different legal category, different treatment. Judge Whitmore listened. She made no notes. She asked 2 questions, both technical, both precise, and Patricia answered both without hesitation. Then Whitmore looked at Elena. "Ms. Marlowe," she said, "you're the named holder." "Yes, Your Honor." "How long have you held this instrument?" "Technically since 1993, Elena said. "I became aware of it 3 weeks ago, and you activated it this morning." "Yes." "Why?" The room was quiet. Hargrove had a pen in his hand and was holding it slightly too tightly. "Vale Shipping employs 216 people," Elena said. "The restructuring agreement that was signed this morning would have transferred operational governance to an outside entity connected through a specific chain of corporate relationships to a party with a documented interest in the company's failure. The performance targets in the contingency clause were calibrated against freight projections that had been manipulated to ensure they would be missed." She paused. "I activated the instrument to protect those employees. That's what it was designed to do. That's the only reason I used it." Whitmore looked at her for a moment. Then she looked at the charter document open in front of her. She asked Patricia 3 more questions. She asked Hargrove 2. She recessed for 14 minutes. She came back. "The instrument is valid," she said. "Counsel's preservation language argument is persuasive. The 2003 revision does not supersede instruments filed under the Charter's foundational protective provisions. The emergency injunction is denied. The freeze stands." Hargrove was on his feet immediately. "Your Honor, we would request." "You can appeal," Whitmore said. "That's your right. But the freeze stands pending appeal, and given the preservation language, I'd suggest your client consider carefully whether the appellate investment is worthwhile." She closed the file. "We're adjourned." She left. The room broke into motion. Hargrove turned to confer with his team, low, rapid voices, heads together. Patricia was already writing notes on a yellow pad. The paralegal beside her was on her phone. Adrian put his hand on Elena's arm. She looked at him. "It holds," he said. "Yes." Her voice was even. But her eyes were bright. Not with tears. Not quite, but with the particular intensity of someone who had been holding something very tightly for a long time, and had just been told they could keep up holding it. "You need to sit," he said. She realized she'd been standing. He sat beside her. His knee was touching hers. She didn't move away. "What happens now?" he said to Patricia. Patricia set her pen down. "Now it gets harder. The freeze is active and the audit is running. The investigation will surface Gideon's connections within the next 2 to 3 weeks. When it does, you're going to need to be in front of the board before they hear it anywhere else. Full disclosure," he said. "Everything, the affair, the restructuring, Sienna. Your failure to act on Elena's concerns when she first raised them." She looked at him directly. "You don't get to control the narrative by omitting the parts that make you look bad. That's how people lose boards. You tell them everything, and you tell them you take responsibility." He nodded. "When?" Elena asked. "As soon as possible. Before Gideon can call an emergency session of his own. I'd want you in front of them Monday morning." "That's 3 days," Adrian said. "I know. Use them." She started gathering her files. The room was almost empty now. Hargrove's team had moved out. The paralegal was on a call in the hallway. The fluorescent light buzzed quietly above them. Elena was looking at the table. "What?" Adrian said. She pressed her hand against her stomach. A brief pause. "Nothing." He went still. "Braxton Hicks," she said. "I've been having them for 2 weeks. It's fine." "Elena, it's fine." She looked at him. "It's not time. I know the difference." He looked at her for a long moment. She held his gaze with the directness she always had. The look that said she was being accurate, that she knew her own body, that she didn't need managing. He looked away first. They left the courthouse at 4:15. The rains had stopped. The air was cold and wet, and the courthouse steps were dark with water, and Elena held the railing going down, and he stayed close without touching her. In the car, she said, "We need to talk about the board meeting." "Monday," he said. "Patricia's right, full disclosure. I need to not be in the room for that," she said. He looked at her. "It has to come from you," she said. "Not from both of us. Not with me sitting there. It has to be you standing in front of them and saying what happened." "I know," he said. "I know that." She looked out the window, the city moving past, wet and gray, and after he waited. "After the board meeting," she said. "After the investigation. After whatever comes from Gideon's challenge." She kept her eyes on the window. Her voice was measured. "I want to talk about what we do." "We," he said. "About the marriage," she said. "About us." He held the wheel. The light ahead turned red, and he stopped and sat in the stopped car with his wife beside him, and the city wet and gray around them. "I'm not going to ask you to make a decision right now," he said. "I know you're not." She turned from the window and looked at him. "But I need you to know that the decision I make, it won't be about the company. It won't be about the investigation or the board or any of it." She paused. "It'll be about whether I can live inside a marriage where I spent 6 months invisible." He looked at the red light. "I don't know the answer yet," she said. "I just need you to know that's the question." The light changed. He drove. That night he went to Noah's room. He stood in the doorway for a moment, the way he'd done weeks ago, looking at the assembled crib and small saw dresser in the mobile, with the wooden birds. Elena had gone to bed early. Her blood pressure was up slightly, within safe range but worth watching, and she'd taken her medication and lain down by 9. He crossed to the dresser, opened the top drawer, found the envelope beneath the folded blanket. He took the photograph out. The infant in the photograph was Elena. He knew that now had known it since Elena had told him, had felt it somewhere past, knowing when he'd looked at his father's letter to Harlan Cross. He stood in Noah's room and looked at the face of his wife as a newborn and felt something move through him that he couldn't name cleanly. Something composite grief and recognition and a very specific kind of shame that didn't have a clean edge. She saved our family. 30 years ago, his father had looked at an 8-week-old infant and seen something worth protecting, had built a legal instrument around that seeing, had trusted it to her without telling her, without telling anyone, because he'd understood that the people who need to control things are the ones who should never be trusted with the things that matter most. Don't tell Adrian. He'd try to control it. That's his nature. It's also his limitation. He held the photograph. He thought about the board meeting Monday, about standing in front of 12 people and saying, "I had an affair with my executive liaison who was placed in my company by my uncle's people specifically to exploit my personal situation. My wife identified the threat weeks before I did. I dismissed her concerns because I had stopped believing she was worth listening to. I was wrong on every count." He had given speeches before. He had delivered bad news in boardrooms, had managed crises, had navigated the collapse of a $47 million deal and walked out the other side. He had never had to stand up and say the specific truth of his own failure to people who were paid to evaluate his fitness to lead. He put the photograph back in the envelope. He put the envelope back under the blanket. He closed the drawer. He went to the doorway and stood there and looked at the room. The crib, the mobile, the window, where the streetlight came through thin curtains and made a stripe of yellow on the wall. A room waiting for someone who hadn't arrived yet. A room that Elena had put together by herself in the months when he'd been in his office not listening, piece by piece, with the same careful precision she brought to everything. He turned off the light. In the hallway, he stopped. Elena was standing at the other end, outside their bedroom door. She'd gotten up for water. Probably she did that most nights. She stood in the hallway in the dark, one hand on the door frame, and looked at him. He looked back. The hallway was dark and quiet, and neither of them said anything for a moment. "Adrian," she said. Her voice was different, tighter. He moved before she finished saying his name. 3 steps. 4. He reached her and she had both hands on the doorframe now, and her face was not frightened, not quite, but alert in a specific way that he recognized from years of watching her recognize things before other people did. "Contraction," she said. "How long?" "This is the 3rd one in 20 minutes. He had his phone in his hand already. "That's not Braxton Hicks." "No," she said. "I know." Her grip on the doorframe tightened. He watched her go through it, whatever it was, the wave of it, her jaw set and her breath controlled, and her eyes focused on something past his shoulder. 30 seconds. Maybe 40. Then she breathed out. "Okay," she said. "We're going," he said. "I know." She looked at him. Her face was pale, and her hair was loose, And she was 37 weeks pregnant and standing in a dark hallway at 11 o'clock at night, and she looked in the particular way of a person who had spent 3 weeks holding something enormous like someone who was finally genuinely ready to put it down. "Let me get your bag," he said. "It's already packed," she said. "It's been packed for 2 weeks." Of course it had. He got the bag. He helped her down the stairs, his hand at her elbow, not gripping, just present, just there. She moved carefully and didn't lean on him and didn't refuse him either. They got to the car. He got her in. He went around to the driver's side. He started the engine. "Patricia needs to know," Elena said. If the timing, the board meeting is Monday, I'll call her. And Marcus needs the additional Lassiter documentation. I have a folder on my laptop desktop labeled L internal. He needs everything in it, Elena." She looked at him. "I'll handle it," he said. "You don't have to manage everything tonight." She held his gaze. Her jaw was set and her hands were in her lap, and she was doing it again. The thing she always did, pulling it inward, holding the line. "I know," she said. "I know I don't have to." He pulled out of the driveway. "I just don't know how to stop," she said. Her voice was quiet. Not broken. Elena's voice didn't break, but honest in a way she didn't often allow. "I've been holding everything for so long that I don't—" She stopped, looked at the windshield. "I don't know how to let something just happen without managing it first." He drove. "You don't have to manage this," he said. "I'm here." She said nothing. He kept driving through the wet, empty streets, city lights blurred in the rain-slicked road, everything quiet except the sound of the engine, and her breathing slow, counted, controlled. As another contraction moved through her, and she wrote it out in silence, her hands steady in her lap, her eyes forward, still holding the line the only way she knew how. At the hospital entrance, the light was bright and white, and the automatic doors opened ahead of them, and he got out and came around. And she was already reaching for the door handle, already moving, already doing it herself. He put his hand over hers on the handle. She stopped. "I've got it," he said. She looked at him through the window. Then she moved her hand and let him open the door. He helped her out. She was standing on the pavement in the bright white light, his hand at her arm, and she looked up at the hospital entrance, the automatic doors, the lit lobby beyond, the shape of what was coming, and then she looked at him. "Whatever happens after," she said. "Whatever I decide." He waited. "You should know," she said. "You came today, when they called, when I couldn't reach you." She held his gaze. "You came." He didn't say anything. She looked at the entrance again. "Okay," she said, "let's go." They walked through the doors together, into the light, into what came next, and behind them the night was wet and cold and the city kept moving. Gideon somewhere in it making calls. Patricia somewhere in it, building arguments. The board 3 days away, the investigation running, the freeze holding, the whole enormous weight of everything that had built and broken and were still, somehow, not finished with. All of it, still there, still waiting. But right now she was walking through a bright doorway, and he was beside her, and she had let him open the door, and that for this one moment was enough. Noah arrived at 4:47 in the morning. Not easily. Nothing about it was easy. Labor ran 11 hours, which the nurses said was reasonable for a first delivery, and which Elena, who had managed the entire thing with the same controlled ferocity she brought to everything, would have disputed if she'd had the energy. She didn't scream. She made sounds that were not screaming, but were close compressed, gutted sounds that came from somewhere past language, from the part of a person that exists before they learn to hold things in. Adrian stayed. He had not been certain she would want him to. He'd asked in the first hour, sitting in the chair beside her bed, while she worked through contractions with her eyes closed, and her breathing counted, whether she wanted him to step out. She'd opened her eyes and looked at him and said no, in a voice that was entirely clear despite everything, and he had stayed. He held her hand when she let him. She didn't always let him. There were stretches where she pulled away and worked through it alone, jaw set, eyes fixed on the middle distance, and he sat beside her and didn't reach, and didn't speak, and just stayed present in the way she'd once told him. Years ago in a different life was the hardest thing for him to do. Just be somewhere without trying to manage it. He was still learning. Noah came into the world at 4:47 with the particular furious objection of someone who had not requested this and wanted it known. The sound of him filled the room, and Elena's head dropped back against the pillow, and she made a sound that was not a word, something raw and released, something that had been held too long and finally wasn't. Adrian looked at his son. Then he looked at Elena. Her eyes were closed. Her face was wet. Her chest was moving in the slow, ragged rhythm of someone who had just done the hardest physical thing of their life, and was still in the process of understanding that it was over. She did not look peaceful. She looked like someone who had been through something real, marked by it, changed by it, present in a way that people only become when they've come through something that required everything they had. The nurse put Noah on her chest. Elena opened her eyes. She looked at her son for a long time without speaking. He was red-faced and furious, and his eyes squeezed shut, and his hands were fists, and he was objecting to everything about his situation. And she looked at him with an expression Adrian had never seen on her before, unguarded, completely, in a way that her face almost never was. And then she put both arms around him and held on. Adrian stood beside the bed. He did not reach for Noah. Not yet. This was hers first, he understood that. After a while she looked up at him. Her eyes were dark and tired and entirely clear. "Hey," she said. "Hey," he said back. She looked at Noah again. Adrian sat down in the chair beside the bed and rested his elbows on his knees and looked at the two of them. His wife and his son, in the gray pre-dawn light of a hospital room, the monitors beeping softly, the nurses moving with the practiced quiet of people doing ordinary work in extraordinary moments. He thought, I have broken things that may not be repairable. He thought, this still happened. This is still real. He didn't say either of those things. He sat in the chair and stayed. Monday came in 5 days, not 3. Patricia had pushed the board meeting when Elena delivered. She'd called Adrian at 6 in the morning on Saturday and told him the board could wait until Thursday without material risk. The freeze was holding, the injunction appeal. Hargrove had filed, was moving slowly through the appellate queue. Gideon's people had gone quiet in a way that suggested they were reassessing rather than accelerating. Take the days, Patricia said. You'll need them. He took them. He was at the hospital through Sunday afternoon. He slept in the chair both nights, which was not sleeping so much as existing in a horizontal position in 2-hour increments. He brought Elena what she needed. He held Noah when she handed him over, the particular specific weight of a newborn, the warmth of him, the way he fit against Adrian's chest with the absolute trust of something that didn't yet know enough to withhold it. He thought about that a lot. The trust of it. The way Noah settled against him, without reservation, without the long, patient process of earning it back. He was not going to get that from Elena. He knew that. Some things, once broken, didn't return to their original form. They healed into something different, something that bore the mark of the break. He'd spent years believing that applied to companies, to negotiations, to professional relationships. He hadn't understood that it applied most completely to the people who'd trusted you longest. Elena's mother flew in from Gloucester on Sunday. Margaret Marlowe was exactly what her daughter had made her sound like: direct, unhurried, with the particular quality of someone who had carried difficult things quietly for a long time and come out the other side still standing. She arrived at the hospital with a bag of Elena's favorite food, from a restaurant Elena had mentioned once, years ago, and she hugged her daughter for a long time, and then she looked at Noah and said, "There you are," with the certainty of someone who had been expecting him. She looked at Adrian. He met her eyes. She didn't say anything immediately. She took Noah from his arms and sat down in the chair and held her grandson and looked at him with the same uncovered expression Elena had worn in the first hour, and Adrian understood that this quality, this specific capacity for undefended attention, was something Elena had learned from watching her mother practice it for 30 years. "She told you," Margaret said, "about what I found, what Robert did." "Yes," he said. She nodded. Her eyes didn't leave Noah's face. "I should have told her sooner. I kept waiting for the right time." A pause. There's never a right time for something like that. You just have to say it. He looked at Elena, who was watching her mother with the particular attention of someone seeing something they'd seen 1,000 times and were only now understanding. "I know the feeling," he said. Margaret looked at him then. A full, direct look, her daughter's look. The same quality of it, the same refusal to soften what was being seen. "You heard her," she said, simply, not an accusation. A fact stated by someone who dealt in facts. "Yes," he said. She held his gaze for another moment. Then she looked back at Noah. "Well," she said, "you're here now." He didn't know exactly what she meant by that. He thought she might have meant several things at once. He thought she was probably right on all of them. Thursday's board meeting lasted 4 hours. Adrian stood in front of the 12-member board of Vale Shipping in a conference room on the 32nd floor and told them everything. He used no notes. Had spent 3 evenings at the kitchen table. Elena was home by then, settled in the living room with Noah while her mother moved through the house with the practical efficiency of a woman, making herself useful, preparing what he needed to say, And then he had left all of it on the table because Patricia was right, that reading from notes made you look like you were managing the truth rather than telling it. He told them about Sienna, about the affair, about the way he'd allowed his personal situation to compromise his professional judgment, and the way Gideon's people had identified that vulnerability and exploited it through the mechanism of a manipulated restructuring agreement. He told them about Elena's concerns when she'd raised them, what she'd said specifically, what he'd done with it. He told them about the protective clause, about Robert Vale's 1993 filing, and Harlan Cross's drafting, and the infant in the photograph, who was now a 33-year-old woman who had activated a legal instrument designed by his father to save the company from exactly this kind of threat, and had done it correctly, had done it precisely, had done it despite the fact that her husband had spent 6 months treating her judgment as though it were a symptom of something rather than the most valuable asset in the building. He told them he was wrong, specifically, without qualification. He told them he was voluntarily stepping back from executive operations, pending the independent audit's completion. He was not resigning. He was not disappearing. But he was not going to stand in front of them and ask them to trust his judgment, while his judgment was under formal review. The room was quiet when he finished. Then Marcus Hale, the board's longest-serving member 71, former maritime attorney, the kind of man who had seen companies built and companies destroyed and could tell the difference between a leader facing down failure and a leader trying to survive it, leaned forward. The investigation, he said. Gideon's connection to Meridian. How solid is it? Patricia Osei has the full documentation, Adrian said. She's prepared to present it to this board and to the relevant authorities today if you authorize it. And Lassiter? Adrian held Marcus Hale's gaze. The evidence suggests he provided information about the protective clause to Gideon's people. That is currently part of the investigation. Hale nodded slowly. He's been placed on administrative leave? As of this morning. Yes. Another board member, Dion Cho, the youngest at 48, the one who had been sending the restless check-in calls that Adrian now understood, had been at Gideon's direction, looked at the table. She had not met his eyes since the meeting started. What do you need from us? Marcus Hale said. Authorization to proceed with the independent audit and the referral to outside authorities, Adrian said, and a vote on whether the protective clause activation stands as a legitimate board-level governance action. It does, Hale said. He looked around the table. All in favor. 11 hands. Diane Cho's came up last slowly, but it came up. 11-0, Hale said. Motion carries. He looked at Adrian. Step back, do what you need to do, and come back clean. This company's been here longer than any of us, and it'll be here after. Don't make Robert's kid clean up your mess twice. Adrian held the old man's eyes. No, he said, I won't. The investigation ran 9 weeks. In those 9 weeks, the independent audit confirmed everything Marcus Dell had found, and a significant amount he hadn't. Meridian Capital Partners was dismantled as a corporate entity when 3 of its 4 managing principals were referred to federal authorities for securities fraud connected to a separate maritime investment scheme that the Vale shipping investigation had inadvertently uncovered. The freight projection models Sienna had provided were formally identified as manipulated. The methodology had introduced a systematic bias that suppressed baseline growth figures and made the contingency clause's targets appear achievable while ensuring they couldn't be met without extraordinary market conditions. Gideon Vale settled. He did not admit wrongdoing. His attorneys were too careful for that, but he signed a consent decree that barred him from acquiring any controlling interest in Vale Shipping or its subsidiaries for 15 years and required the dissolution of Continental Harbor Group's holding structure that had been used in the Meridian arrangement. He paid a civil penalty that his attorneys described in public filings as a business decision rather than an admission. Adrian didn't have to see his uncle's face when he signed it. He heard about it from Patricia, who described Gideon's expression in one word, diminished, and said nothing further. Brett Lassiter resigned before the investigation formally reached him and retained his own counsel. The question of what he would ultimately face was in other people's hands now, and Adrian had spent enough energy on it. Sienna Cross left New England entirely. She was not criminally charged. The evidence of her role was circumstantial in the ways that mattered for prosecution, even if it was clear in every other way, and she relocated to a city whose name Adrian didn't retain when Patricia mentioned it and didn't ask her to repeat. He thought about her occasionally in those 9 weeks. Not with anger required a kind of energy he was directing elsewhere. but with something closer to the particular exhaustion of a person who has understood, too late and too completely, exactly how they were used. He'd handed someone a key to the house and she'd used it. He was responsible for that. He'd spent months understanding exactly how responsible. Elena filed for separation in the 6th week. She told him herself on a Tuesday evening, sitting in the living room while Noah slept in the bassinet beside her. She told him directly, without preamble or apology, the way she did everything. "I've talked to an attorney," she said. "I want to be clear about what I'm asking for and what I'm not." He sat across from her. Noah was asleep, making the small sounds of a sleeping infant, and the room was quiet in the specific way of a house that has settled into a different shape than it started in. "I'm not asking you to leave Noah," she said. "I want him to know his father. I want you to be present, completely present, in the way you weren't present with me. I'm not using him as leverage." "I know you're not," he said. "I'm asking for the house," she said. "It's practical. Noah is here. My mother is here. I'm asking for the house and for a clean division of my independent assets, which includes," she paused, "which includes the protective clause. Patricia and I have been talking about how to formalize that." "It was never mine," he said. "You know I know that." She looked at him. "I know." "What else?" he said. She looked at her hands. "I don't want to be at war with you," she said. "I want to be," she stopped. "I want to be able to be in the same room with you 20 years from now and have it be okay. For Noah's sake and for mine." She looked at him. "I don't know if we get there, but I want to try for it." He looked at his son, sleeping in the bassinet, the small fists, the specific perfect weight of him. "Okay," he said. She held his gaze. "You're not going to fight it." "No, Adrian Elena," he said her name quietly. "I'm not going to fight it. You made a decision. You told me the decision would be about whether you could live inside the marriage we had, not about the company or the investigation. You told me that in the car." He looked at the window. "I've thought about that every day for 9 weeks. And I think," he stopped, looked back at her. "I think you've been answering that question since this afternoon in the corridor. I just kept not listening." She was very still. "So no," he said. "I'm not going to fight it." She looked at him for a long moment. Something moved through her face. Not relief, not sadness, not the complex mixture of both that he might have expected. Something quieter. The expression of a person who has been carrying the weight of someone else's possible argument and has just been told they can put it down. "Thank you," she said. He nodded. They sat in the quiet for a while. Noah slept. The room held them both without requiring anything of either of them, and that was something. He moved out the following weekend. He took his clothes, his personal papers, the books he'd actually read rather than displayed, a photograph from his desk at home and Elena at a harbor in Portugal, 5 years ago, both of them laughing at something out of frame, her hair blown sideways by the wind, his arm around her shoulders, both of them looking like people who were happy in the uncomplicated way that people can be before they've discovered the specific ways they'll fail each other. He kept the photograph. He moved into a rented apartment 7 minutes from the house. Walking distance when the weather was right, he'd chosen it for that reason. Noah came to him on Tuesdays and on alternating weekends. Elena brought him herself the first time, standing in the apartment doorway with the baby on her hip, looking around at the rented space with its sparse furniture and the single photograph on the otherwise empty desk. She looked at the photograph for a moment. She didn't say anything about it. She handed him Noah. He took him that weight, that warmth, that absolute unearned trust, and she nodded once and said she'd be back at 6 and walked back down the corridor to the elevator. He stood at the door and watched her go and thought, she is going to be all right. Not easily, not without cost, but all right. He was going to have to learn what all right looked like for himself. He went back inside, sat on the couch. Noah was awake, looking at the ceiling with the unfocused attention of a 2-month-old examining the world and finding it both interesting and insufficient. Adrian looked at him. Noah looked at the ceiling. "Hi," Adrian said. Noah continued his assessment of the ceiling. "I know," Adrian said. "I know." The board voted in the 10th week to restructure the executive governance framework. The restructuring included a new position, Director of Independent Governance, created specifically to institutionalize the kind of protective oversight that Robert Vale's 1993 instrument had been designed to provide. The position required someone with corporate strategy experience, an independent relationship to the executive team, and no conflict of interest in the existing power structure. The search committee offered it to Elena. She asked for 48 hours to think about it. She called Adrian on the second day. "The board meeting," she said. when they voted to offer me the position. Were you in the room? No, he said. I'm still on operational leave. Did you advocate for it? Before the vote. A pause. I told Marcus Hale, he said, that the governance gap the investigation exposed needed a permanent institutional response. I told him that response should be held by someone with demonstrated commitment to the company's employees rather than its executive structure. He paused. I didn't say your name. Silence on the line. He thought of it himself? She said. He'd already thought of it, Adrian said. I think he thought of it the moment you walked into that hearing room. She was quiet for a moment. I'm going to take it, she said. Good, he said. It'll be strange, she said, being in that building. Yes, he said, probably. But the employees, she stopped. He could hear her thinking, the particular quality of her silence when she was working something out. There are 2,400 people in that company who had no idea what almost happened. No one is going to tell them how close it was, but the structural protections that kept it from happening, those can be permanent. Those can be real. Yes, he said, they can. She was quiet again. How are you doing? She said. It came out differently than her usual questions, less structured, less exact. More like something she'd asked before deciding whether to ask it. I'm figuring it out, he said. Yeah, a pause. Me too. He heard Noah in the background, a small vocal sound, not a cry, just the sound of an infant registering his presence in a room. He's awake, she said. Tell him I said hi. She made a sound that was almost, not quite, but almost a laugh, short and real and unguarded. I'll see you Tuesday, she said. Tuesday, he agreed. She hung up. He sat with the phone in his hand for a moment. Outside the apartment window, the afternoon was bright, a June afternoon, warm and clear, the kind of day that arrives without warning after a long run of gray. He looked at it. Then he looked at the photograph on the desk. Portugal. 5 years ago, the harbor, the wind. Both of them laughing at something neither of them could remember now. He picked the photograph up. He held it for a moment. Then he put it face down on the desk, gently, carefully, and looked at the window and the June afternoon, and thought about Tuesday. On the morning of Elena's first board meeting, as director of independent governance, Adrian was at the apartment when his phone buzzed. A photograph. From Elena's number, he opened it. It was Noah. In his crib, awake, looking up at the camera, with the wide, unfocused attention of a 3-month-old encountering morning. Beside the crib, on the small dresser, just visible at the edge of the frame, a small wooden picture frame. In the frame, a faded photograph, black and white. An infant on a white blanket. He looked at it for a long time. He typed back, "He looks like you." She responded after a moment. Good. He set the phone down. He thought about Robert Vale writing 4 words on the back of a photograph and putting it in a box marked miscellaneous, trusting that the right person would find it at the right time. He thought about Margaret Marlowe carrying a secret through 30 years of ordinary life, raising a daughter who turned out to be exactly the person his father had seen in her at 8 weeks old. He thought about Harlan Cross, 83 years old, and sharp-voiced, saying your mother was a good woman who did a hard thing for people who didn't deserve the size of her sacrifice. He thought about standing in a boardroom 9 weeks ago and saying I was wrong in front of 12 people who were paid to judge him, and how it had felt. Not good, not clean, but real, which was the closest thing to solid ground he'd found in months. He got dressed. He drove to the Vale Shipping Tower at 7:45, which was 45 minutes before Elena's meeting was scheduled to start. He had no operational role today. He was still on leave. He had no reason to be there, except that he'd worked in that building for 15 years, and he wanted to cease it while it was still the thing it was becoming, rather than the thing it had almost been. He went to the 32nd floor, stood at the window of the empty conference room, where 5 months ago he'd signed his name to a document that would have handed everything to Gideon's people. Looked out the harbor, the ships moving in the channel, the water gray and silver in the early light. The whole enormous, ordinary machinery of the thing his grandfather had built, and his father had protected, and he had very nearly lost. At 8:15, Elena walked past the conference room door. She didn't see him. She was looking at her phone, moving with the purposeful efficiency he'd known for 6 years. Heels, dark jacket, the folder under her arm, the same forward attention that meant she was already 3 steps ahead of the current moment. She went into the boardroom. The door closed. He stood at the window for a while longer. Then he picked up his jacket and walked to the elevator and rode it down to the lobby and walked out into the June morning. He went to his car. He sat there for a moment with the engine off. He thought about calling his attorney. He thought about calling Patricia. He thought about the 37 things still in motion. The appellate challenge, the federal referral, the restructuring of the governance framework, his own return to operations whenever the audit closed, and the board decided they were ready for it. He did not call anyone. He sat in the car and looked at the harbor through the windshield and let the morning be what it was, complicated, unresolved, in the ways that things take years to resolve, marked by everything that had happened and not sanitized by any of it. He had not won anything. He had not lost everything. What he had was a son who trusted him completely, the way only someone too young to know better can trust, and a woman who had decided, carefully and correctly, that she would not let what he'd done to her define what she built next. And a company. His grandfather's company, his father's company, that was going to be, because of a photograph and a dormant clause, and the daughter of a paralegal who had done a hard thing 30 years ago, something closer to what it should have been all along. He started the car. He had Noah on Tuesday he drove. He picked Noah up at 9 in the morning. Elena answered the door in jeans and a loose sweater, her hair pulled back, still holding a coffee mug. She looked different than she had 5 months ago. Not softer, not harder, but more settled. The way a person looks when they've stopped bracing for something. She stepped back and let him in, and Noah was in the bouncer on the living room floor, fully awake, kicking both legs with the focused enthusiasm of someone who had recently discovered that legs were something he had. He's been up since 6, Elena said. He's in a mood. What kind of mood? Opinionated. Adrian crouched down beside the bouncer. Noah looked at him with the direct, assessing attention he'd had since the first week already, at 3 months, with the specific quality of his mother's gaze, that particular refusal to look away from the thing in front of him. Hey, Adrian said. Noah kicked his legs. Yeah, Adrian said. I know. A lot's been happening. Elena made a sound behind him. Not quite a laugh. Close enough. He picked Noah up. That weight, that warmth, that smell that he'd come to was the smell of something irreplaceable, and stood up and turned around. Elena was leaning against the doorframe between the living room and the kitchen, mug in both hands, watching them with an expression that was unreadable, in the specific way her expressions were unreadable when she was feeling something she hadn't decided how to name yet. How was the meeting, he said. She looked at her mug, long, productive, a pause. Marcus Hale wants to expand the governance framework to include a quarterly employee impact review. I told him I'd draft the parameters. That's good. It'll take time to get right. She looked up, most things do. He held her gaze for a moment. Noah grabbed his collar with one fist and held on. I'll have him back by 6, Adrian said. She nodded. He needs to eat at noon. The bag has everything. She pushed off the doorframe and went back to the kitchen. He heard the sound of the mug being set on the counter, the refrigerator opening and closing, the ordinary sounds of a Tuesday morning in a house that had become hers alone. He stood in the living room and looked at the space, the crib visible through the nursery door, small dresser, with the framed photograph at the edge of the mirror, the couch, where 5 months ago they'd sat across from each other, and she'd told him the decision would be about the marriage. The room was different than it had been. Small changes, a lamp he didn't recognize, a print on the wall she'd always wanted and he'd never gotten around to hanging, a stack of books on the coffee table that were hers completely, chosen without any consideration of what he might want to read. The room was becoming itself, becoming hers. He carried Noah to the door, collected the bag from the hooks beside it, and turned back. Elena had come out of the kitchen. She was standing in the hallway with her arms crossed loosely, not blocking the door, just present. She looked at Noah in his arms, the way she always did, directly, with that undefended attention. And then she looked at Adrian. He had a bad night last week, she said. Wednesday. I don't know if it'll happen again, but I wanted you to know. What helped? Walking, just moving. He settled if I kept moving. He nodded. Filed it. She uncrossed her arms, put her hands in her pockets. She was looking at Noah still, and he was looking back at her with the complete, unfiltered attention of an infant who has not yet learned that looking directly at the people you love is something adults complicate. Elena, he said. She looked at him. He wasn't sure what he'd meant to say. He'd had several things in his mind on the drive over things that needed saying eventually. Things he'd been carrying around in the early mornings when Noah wasn't there, and the apartment was quiet, and he had too much space to think in. But standing here with his son in his arms, and her in the hallway, and the ordinary Tuesday morning around them, all of it felt like too much, like opening a door that the moment wasn't wide enough for. The photograph, he said instead. The one you sent this morning. She waited. I want you to know. He stopped. Tried again. I understand now what he saw. My father. When he looked at you and your mother and made the decision he made, he looked at Noah's face. It wasn't abstract for him. It wasn't just legal architecture. He saw something in your family that he trusted more than he trusted his own blood, and he was right. He let out a breath. That's not a small thing to sit with. She was quiet for a moment. No, she said, it's not. I'm not saying it to make a claim on anything, he said. I know what the filing means, and I know it's yours, and I know what we are now and what we're not. He looked at her. I wanted you to know that I see it. What you've been carrying. What your mother carried before you. I see it, and I'm not going to pretend I always did. The hallway was quiet. Noah made a small sound. Not distress, just commentary. And Adrian shifted him slightly, and he settled. Elena looked at him for a long moment. The look that saw past the presented thing to the actual thing. The look he'd lived alongside for 6 years and had somehow still managed to underestimate. I know, she said. I can see that you do. She stepped forward and kissed Noah once on the top of his head, quick, firm, the gesture of someone leaving something they'll come back to, and then stepped back. 6 o'clock, she said. 6 o'clock, he said. He went out the door and down the front walk to the car. He got Noah settled into the car seat, the specific involved process of it, the clips and angles and the infant's cheerful non-cooperation, and straightened up and looked back at the house. The front door was closed. The curtains in the living room were still. The house sat in the June morning, in the ordinary way of a house on a Tuesday, giving nothing away. He got in the car. He drove to the park 3 blocks from his apartment, the one with the wide path along the water and the benches where old men played chess on weekend mornings, and the light at this hour came in long and low through the trees. He walked the path with Noah in the carrier against his chest, one hand braced at the baby's back, the harbor visible through the trees to his left, the city noise a low and distant thing. Noah was quiet. He looked at everything, the trees, the light, the other people on the path, a dog that passed too close and made him go momentarily rigid before deciding it was acceptable. He looked at the world with the complete, unguarded attention that Adrian was slowly understanding was not just an infant's limitation, but an infant-specific genius. The ability to receive what was actually in front of you without filtering it through everything you were afraid of. He thought about his father, about the letter to Harlan Cross, the 3 paragraphs, the last one. Some people carry something in them from the start. He thought about Elena in the boardroom this morning, moving past the conference room door, with her folder and her phone and her forward attention, already 3 steps ahead of the current moment, stepping into a role that had been designed 30 years ago by a man who'd seen her coming. He thought about Margaret Marlowe, sitting in the hospital chair, with Noah against her chest, saying, "There you are," with the certainty of someone who had been expecting him. He thought about all the things that had to go exactly as wrong as they did, in order to arrive here on this path, in this light, with this weight against his chest, and he didn't know what to do with that, didn't have a frame for it that wasn't either too neat or too bleak. He just walked. The path curved along the water, and the light moved through the trees, and Noah's hand found his shirt and held on, the grip of it firm and absolute, and Adrian walked and didn't try to resolve anything, and let the morning be what it was, imperfect, unfinished, ongoing, real. At the end of the path he stopped. He looked at the harbor, the ships in the channel, the water gray and silver in the morning light, exactly as it had been from the 32nd floor window, exactly as it had been every morning for as long as he could remember. Indifferent to what had happened in the building above it, indifferent to who had almost taken what, indifferent to all of it. It just kept moving. He stood there for a while, his hand on his son's back, and let it.